a loyal dog is killed, and a whole web of corruption starts to leak like a rotting corpse. He thought it was just one gunshot, but he has just declared war on a living war machine. You think this is just about a dead dog? No. It's a wake-up call for an America rotting from the inside out. If justice no longer exists, then who will act? And will you just watch or burn the whole system down? That night, the neighborhood lay deep in silence, broken only by the whisper of wind slipping through the old trees by the porch, casting faint, shifting shadows on the gray brick wall. On the stone-tiled steps, Shadow, the jet-black German shepherd, lay curled up, ears never letting their guard down. A stray cat crawled under the fence, slipping away into the wild daisies by the yard. Shadow merely tilted his head. No growl, no chase. What held his attention wasn't the harmless ball of fur, but a strange scent drifting on the wind, slowing his breath, then making it suddenly heavy. Inside the pitch-deck living room, a man stood half-hidden by the window frame. In his hand, a half-empty glass of water. Cold sweat clung to the glass pane, reflecting the side of his gaunt cheek and eyes that burned like dying embers. He looked at Shadow, pressed his lips tight, and murmured words only the dog could hear. "You caught it too, huh, boy?" His grip tightened slightly when the faint crackle of a radio came from the alley. So soft, yet enough to stir the territorial instinct long buried in Shadow's blood. The dog wouldn't wait any longer. One hard breath burst from his chest, making his short fur stand on end. He sprang to his feet, leapt off the steps without a sound. Claws scraped the cement with a dry scratch, followed by a bark that ripped through the still night. This bark was nothing like the daily warning growls. It was a signal. Outside the gate, headlights flared, followed by an engine sputtering into silence. Red and blue lights flickered, throwing iron shadows across the fence, painting the trees in tangled streaks of blood and black like a trap sprung open. Inside the gate, Shadow growled low, head down, the fur along his spine bristling, waiting for the order. Up and down the street, a few windows snapped open. Someone peeked out just in time to see the dog barking in sharp bursts before ducking back behind the fence. A middle-aged man slowly drew back his curtain, lifted his phone, and thumbed tremblingly over the record button. Jerome hadn't moved from his spot, his face hid in the dark, breath steady but carrying that old iron scent, the smell of memories that never died. He tilted his head slightly, eyes on Shadow as the dog let out one final bark, drawing out every ounce of threat at the pair stepping out of the patrol car. On the dew-wet lawn, Shadow's paw slammed down, splattering mud. His eyes locked onto the two figures moving toward the iron gate. He didn't retreat. He growled steadily, barked short and firm, each thrum like a warning bell for the clash about to burst under the cold moon. Miller stepped up first, hard soles knocking rhythm on the damp pavement, each step nailed into the concrete like a threat. Behind him, Grady trailed, clutching a citation book, eyes flicking at the growling dog, but not daring to speak. Miller cocked his head, eyes catching the gleam off Shadow's dark coat, then jerked his chin at Grady. "How many times do I gotta tell you? Unleashed dog at night, easiest damn ticket in the book." Grady pressed his lips tight, voice barely a whisper for himself. "But he's not on the street, Miller. He's just barking." Miller snorted a laugh, a short blade slicing the tension. "All that training and you're still soft. Tonight, I'll show you how to make these people obey. Got it?" He stepped closer, one hand brushing the pistol grip at his side. The flashlight in his other hand flicked on, beam stabbing straight into Shadow's eyes. The dog lowered his head, nose snarling, lips peeling back to bare white fangs. The metal chain clipped to the fence post stretched tight, links clinking like hammer taps on a coffin lid, sealing a confrontation ready to blow. On the second floor of the house across the street, a little girl rubbed her eyes, peeking through the curtain, voice trembling. "Mommy, Shadow's barking so loud, are the police gonna take him away?" The mother stayed silent, pulling the curtain tighter, eyes fixed on the two officers by the fence. In the dark, more phones quietly lifted, pinpoints of recording lenses hiding behind cracked blinds, the beams of flashlights and car lights painting scattered glows on the watchers' faces. Grady's eyes darted around, catching glimpses of tiny cameras poking through half-opened windows. He swallowed hard, knuckles white on the citation book. The night was cold, but sweat trickled down his brow. Only Miller stood still as stone, gaze locked on Shadow, thumb flicking the safety off his gun, the matte black Glock glinting under his uniform coat. Suddenly, Miller's shout cracked the silent street like glass. "Over there! Get out here! Leash that dog or I'll shoot him dead!" His breath steamed white, palms squeezing the pistol grip like choking out a bound prey. Behind the window, Jerome pressed close to the wood frame, fingers digging into the edge, veins popping under the rough skin. Shadow didn't back down. He snarled, a short, chest-busting roar, then lunged a short leap onto the wet grass, back arched, shoulders tensed, ready to launch like a fur-coated spear. Miller squinted, teeth clenching down on his lip, thumb pushing the final safety latch. The air froze solid, silent as a grave. In that heartbeat only the chain rattled, a bell tolling the shot no one wanted, but no one could stop. Shadow's snarl hit Miller square in the face like a punch made of sound. The dog slithered right up to the gate, nose nearly touching the half-closed latch, front paws clawing the dirt, coiled to spring through in half a heartbeat. Miller flinched, but his boot stayed rooted to the pavement, finger curling around the trigger, eyes flickering with a stupid pride mixed with primal fear. Grady stammered something, hand darting out to grab Miller's shoulder. Too late. In that split second, Miller's mind spat out its pathetic excuse. It was about to bite me. I acted in self-defense. Almost at the same time, Shadow launched himself, letting out a final hoarse snarl, and the dry crack of a gunshot tore the night apart. A spark flared from the Glock's muzzle, the smell of burnt powder biting into the wet grass. Shadow let out a howl unlike anything the neighborhood had ever heard. It wasn't long. It snapped off mid-note, like a gagged scream that never finished. His body collapsed, front legs twitching, claws scraping the grass with a weak rustle. Those eyes, once bright enough to terrify prowlers in the dark, now fluttered half shut, but still locked onto Miller, an unblinking dagger that no one could pull out. A scream ripped across the street. Old Man Berg's door burst open. He hobbled out, clutching his wooden cane, voice rasping. "Jesus Christ! You really shot him, you bastard!" Shadows spilled out of alleys. Porch lights flicked on all at once, throwing beams over the small yard now speckled with spreading blood. Grady stood frozen, hand still suspended mid-air. His breath hissed through his teeth, eyes glued to Shadow's heaving body. He swallowed, mouth fumbling out broken words. "Oh, God! Miller, you actually shot?" Miller glanced at the growing crowd clustering at the fence, phones raised, red recording lights blinking. He sucked in a lungful of air, shoulders heaving, then spat out a snarl. "Call an ambulance for it? Or for its owner? Screw it. It attacked first, I acted in self-defense. Everybody clear out. Grady, back to the car." He stepped back, boots grinding against the concrete with a shrill scrape, but his eyes never left Shadow's limp, blood-soaked body, jerking on the grass like it was still fighting death itself. Someone snaked an arm through the gate, phone aimed inches from Shadow's face, their breath shaking so hard the sob got stuck in their throat. One foolish bullet had left the barrel, but its aftershock was slicing through the night, slamming straight onto social media, igniting a fury Miller hadn't even begun to imagine. In every eye pinned to him now, he was no longer the man in charge. He was just a man who had shot someone's dog in front of dozens of unwilling witnesses. Inside, Jerome leaned against the heavy wooden door, dry fingers gripping the lock, like he was holding his own spine together. The gunshot had cracked the air no more than a few strides away, but its echo left his ears ringing, every outside sound sinking into a thick, suffocating pit. All he could hear was his heart, pounding his ribs like a battlefield drum, the same rhythm that used to steady him through desert kill zones years ago. He shut his eyes, and in that darkness, Shadow didn't lie dying on the bloody lawn. He crawled through blistering red sand on the night he took his first shrapnel hit, ribs pumping gun smoke, dragging himself back to Jerome, jaws clamped on a camo sleeve, pulling his master out of a kill zone. A sharp cry snapped at Jerome back, a child wailing on the porch. Through the curtain slit, he saw the mother yank her kid inside, but her trembling hand still aimed a phone at the yard. Neighbors were clustering together, whispering like a hive split open. It didn't bite anyone, did it? God, that dog was gentle as a lamb. Why shoot? Where's the owner? Did someone get a clear video? Grady drifted. Adrift in the yard, eyes darting between Miller, the power-drunk gunman, and the buzzing cluster of citizens, each clutching a camera no bigger than a matchbox but lethal enough to kill a career. He grabbed Miller's wrist, voice cracking. "Stop it, Miller. They're recording. Let's go." Miller shoved him off, sinewy arms snapping Grady back a step. He leveled the gun ahead, roaring like a cornered animal. "Step out now, owner. Your dog's dead. Come out and show me your papers." Old man Berg, the toothless coot who'd lived next door to Jerome through countless winters, coughed, then growled. "You shot him for nothing, you damn fool. I filmed every second. Don't think you'll get away." Miller spun, Glock pointed straight at the old man's forehead, finger twitching on the trigger like he'd take a second life to silence a witness. His breath wheezed hot and metallic, eyes bloodshot, pupils bouncing off the old man's hunched figure, still barking curses at the dog killer. Grady gasped for air, heart clawing at his ribs, hands trembling uselessly at his sides. He knew he was standing in quicksand, and it wasn't just Shadow or old man Berg about to be swallowed, but him too, along with this uniformed tyrant. Behind the door's edge, Jerome still hadn't stepped out, but his stare through the curtain had changed. It was no longer the look of a helpless dog owner. It had hardened into a whetstone edge, grinding raw the buried instinct for violence he'd buried when he shed his uniform. His fingers slipped off the lock. One foot slid forward. Breath slipped past his lips, slicing the heavy air like a blade. The door hinge creaked, not even a foot wide yet, but his broad silhouette swallowed every porch light behind him. Jerome stepped onto the stoop, boot heels striking the damp cement in dry, steady knocks. Funeral bells for what came next. The night had cracked open, and that single foolish bullet had just dug the grave for the hand that pulled the trigger. Jerome stepped slowly into the yard, each step pressing down the breath of everyone gathered behind the two cops. No coat, just a tight black t-shirt, still dusted with wood shavings from the door he'd left ajar behind him. Bare arms on full display, crisscrossed with old, jagged scars, souvenirs from bullets, blades and grenades in places no one liked to name. The porch light scraped down salt and pepper hair, a gaunt face, deep-set eyes, and a jaw sharp as an axe blade. Night wind slipped across his nape, carrying a chill that wrapped him like the invisible cloak he used to wear, crawling through minefields. Grady swallowed hard, throat dry as bone, eyes fixed on the faint tattoo half hidden under that coiled bicep. A dagger pressed over a broken wing, an insignia he'd only ever seen buried in classified personnel files when he was a green logistics clerk. His voice cracked, betraying a raw mix of dread and buried awe. Tate, Commander Tate, the last syllable died on his lips. He realized too late he'd just exposed his own fear and his grudging respect for a man who once did things pencil pushers like him only read in whispered footnotes. Miller heard him and sneered, flicking his chin like swatting a fly. Delta Force? That glory days shit is dead, Grady. He's just an old man now, a stubborn bastard who can't leash his mutt. That's it. But his grip on the Glock stayed white-knuckled, muzzle aimed at the gate like he might spit another round at anything that moved near that stubborn old coot. Jerome's eyes didn't flicker. They carved a dead straight line through Miller's pupils. His voice came out slow, scraped over steel, low, but sharp enough to silence every whisper at the gate. Lower the gun. You're shaking, Miller. Don't do something stupid again. That trigger won't save you from me. Behind the two cops, the neighbors murmured louder. More porch lights snapped on and phone flashlights flickered across the damp street. A young woman whispered to her live stream, "Was he really Special Forces? Holy hell, no wonder Shadow was like a wild wolf." Comments slid up the screen. "Cops shot a dog? These guys are dead. Get badge numbers, record everything." Jerome didn't care. He dropped his eyes to his feet. Shadow lay sprawled, belly heaving in broken gasps, eyes dulling but still flicking up at his master, terrified he'd vanish again. A rough, scarred hand brushed across the blood-slicked fur, trembling so faintly it looked like he feared one hard touch might rip the last breath from this loyal thing. Grady leaned closer, voice a hoarse order disguised as a plea. "Listen to me. Don't push him. He's not just some civilian, Miller. You don't have the rank to stand in front of that name." But Miller only shot him a sideways glare, hissed a laugh through clenched teeth, and pressed the Glock's nose against the iron fence bar, almost daring himself to spit another bullet. The night coiled tight again, heavy as a glacier about to splinter from the weight of one misstep, one mistimed growl. Jerome sank to one knee beside Shadow, a calloused palm resting heavy on the battered skull, still radiating faint warmth. Fingers rough as stone stroked along the dog's spine, trying to soothe a pain no vet could fix. At the same time, his eyes lifted, not to Miller, not to Grady, but straight into the phone lens peeking from the gate corner. He let them record it all, a silent order. Film it. Capture everything. Let the whole damn city see who killed a dog for nothing. Miller felt it instantly, the humiliating sting of being ignored like a clown in a borrowed uniform. He barked, voice splitting on a crack he couldn't hide. "Get your hands off that dog. Stand up. Hands on your head. I swear I'll shoot again right now." But his threat shattered the second Jerome's reply landed. Each word a stone dropped down Miller's throat. "You're shaking, Miller. I can hear your trigger finger tremble. I see your palms sweat, drip by drip. You're terrified of yourself, not me." Grady shifted, leaned in, whispering so close his breath tickled Miller's ear. Just for them, but enough to make Miller's gun hand flinch. "Miller, listen to me for once." He single-handedly wiped out a merc team in Hellman. The new Delta boys still call him Ghost. You're not built to stand near him, let alone pull that trigger. He darted a glance at the neighbors, the countless phones blinking red. If blood spilled now, it would loop on every feed by morning. Miller's eyes narrowed, shoulders jerking away from Grady's hiss. He let out a dry laugh, a smoker's cough buried in gunpowder breath. Special forces my ass. I shot a damn dog, so what? I'm the law here. What you gonna do, old man? Die next to your stupid mutt? He finished it by dropping the Glock's muzzle an inch from Shadow's panting skull, finger teasing the safety. One tiny squeeze. A second hole, this time through the storm in the old soldier's chest. The yard froze. Air crystallized to shards of glass. Jerome's breathing changed. The chill that had settled on his shoulders seeped straight into his veins, draining the last flicker of warmth. The soldier long buried inside him stepped forward now, muscle taut, shoulders dropping low like a big cat coiled to spring if its prey flinched. The live stream caught it all in brutal clarity. A trembling rookie, a uniformed drunk on his badge and gun, and a former Delta commander slowly crushing the night flat, with a stare that needed no threat. No roar. Jerome spoke, each word a nail hammered into Miller's skull. Quiet, final, unblinking. This is your last chance. Drop the gun, or you'll pull that trigger for the last time in your life. Grady sucked in a breath, eyes darting from the Glock's muzzle to Miller's sweating face, then down to Shadow's dying gaze still locked on his master. One cheap patrol stop had bred a killing ground tonight, and Grady knew damn well, if Miller spoke one word too many, this wouldn't end with just a dog's blood on the grass. Jerome sank fully to his knees on the trampled grass, now soaked in blood and boot prints. The black t-shirt stretched across his shoulders was smeared with dark, cold patches, the stink of blood mixed with Shadow's wet fur. His hand slipped under Shadow's neck, lifting the dog's head, pressing his forehead to the animal's brow in an old ritual, the same gesture he'd done amid the collapsed walls of Aleppo, when only two living shadows remained, him and this dog. Shadow's breath rattled, whimpers breaking into shards, a hoarse apology leaking from a throat too torn to speak. Each time it tried to gasp, bloody foam bubbled through its furred collar. Jerome stayed there, unmoving, no trembling, no wiping it away. His voice was just a rough whisper, caught by the cold night wind. "Good boy, soldier. You did well. I'm here. You're not dying alone on this filthy grass." Behind the fence, faces froze. Some covered their mouths, but couldn't swallow the sob. A middle-aged woman clutched her daughter's shoulders, pushing her back inside, yet never tore her eyes from the lawn, where a dog refused to die and a man refused to stand. A young man held his phone high, zooming his live stream closer, muttering under his breath, "Jesus, Psycho shot the dog. Bastard." Grady stood wedged between flickering phone lights and the red pulse of the cruiser's flashers. His hand crushed his flashlight handle, his throat burning dry. He looked at Miller, saw blood threads in his eyes. Then at Jerome. Grady understood. This wasn't a suspect anymore. This was a man losing the last living piece of his battlefield soul. Miller coughed, voice rasping out through gritted teeth like a whetstone on steel. "Enough! Get up! You're obstructing an officer. I'll cuff you right now." He lowered the gun slightly. The other hand fished behind him, pulling out the heavy steel cuffs. The click of metal teeth was the promise of chains about to clamp a cornered beast to the dirt. Jerome didn't flinch. He just tilted his head, lips brushing Shadow's sweaty ear, warm breath easing through the soft fur. "You did good, Shadow. I promise I won't leave you cold and alone on this dirty grass." His eyes flicked open, lashes trembling once, before his gaze locked straight onto the glint of steel in Miller's palm, the man so desperate to crown himself law tonight. Miller snarled, cuffs snapping open as he lunged, fingers jabbing at Jerome's shoulder, manners gone with the last shred of sense. The air thickened with dog blood and human rage. The watchers pressed to the fence, barely daring to breathe. Only the wet rustle of grass and the sharp click of metal broke it. A storm ready to rip through the city, seated right here on this bloody lawn beneath a Delta Force memory. Miller's cigarette breath and the cold iron stink of his Glock poured into Jerome's face. His snarl shredded the quiet. "Put the dog down, hands behind your head, or I swear to God I'll fire again, you hear me?" The threat replayed like a broken record, but the tremor in Miller's throat drowned any authority he had left. Jerome didn't rush. One broad palm cradled Shadow's neck, lifting gently, laying the dog's body on its side with care. Thick fingers tucked the hind leg neatly, arranging the posture like a fallen brother, ready for his final march. Only when Shadow's back rested still did Jerome lift his head, breath calm but eyes blazing with a light Grady had never seen in any ordinary man. That light belonged to lawless places, where 1 second slow meant you carried your squad's bones back in a bag. His voice landed like an axe, splitting Miller's skull. "Do you know who taught me to survive, Miller? Delta Force did. You're too green to tell me how to breathe." The words fell on the grass but stuck to every lip nearby, chilling spines like frost on bare skin. Miller's eyes bulged. His grip on the cuffs went bone-white, and spit foamed at the corner of his mouth. "Grady, cuff him, obstruction. Do it now." No longer a cop's command, just the scream of a man spiraling out. Grady jolted, cuffs in hand but fingers twitching. His eyes locked on Jerome's, black pits swallowing every phone light, giving back nothing. Grady swallowed, metal clinking, but he couldn't bring himself to snap it shut on this man's wrists. It took the iron fence, heads packed tight, every phone up, whispers crashing like surf. Unlawful arrest. "He's just holding his dog. Are they nuts? Police brutality. Get that on tape." The live stream erupted. "Justice for Shadow. Poor dog. Poor owner. Sue that cop." The public roar was a tide pounding the wet lawn. The air thickened, a held punch frozen inches from impact. One more snarl from Miller, one snap of Grady's cuff, and blood would spill. Whose blood no longer mattered. Inside that silent vice, Jerome tilted his head, voice gravel and iron, driving nails into Miller's coffin dream of power. "You want to cuff me? Then be ready to bury me right here with this dog." A paper-thin hush suffocated the yard. Miller's jaw locked, shoulders swelling, eyes streaked red. Grady bit his lip until it bled, feet rooted to the grass. He knew this. One stupid move now, and tonight wouldn't end with just dog's blood soaking the soil. Miller growled deep in his throat, lunging forward like a cornered beast humiliated before its pack. His hand clamped the open handcuffs tight, thumb ready on the locking catch, the other wrist locked to his gun grip, waiting for the slightest slip to smash the butt straight into Jerome's neck. Grady, off to the right, exhaled fog into the bloody lawn air, palm hovering near his Glock but lacking the nerve to draw. His voice cracked out a thin warning, no more than a cold gust over drenched grass. "Don't! Miller, wait!" But Miller didn't wait. Patience had long drowned under the brute instinct roaring in his skull. Break his arm, cuff his throat, slam his face in the dirt, prove whose law. Jerome didn't need a reminder on what came next. Since the battlefield ghosts etched their lessons into his veins, his body knew how to shatter a chokehold before thought could catch up. One shoulder roll, smooth, practiced, and his arm snaked under Miller's armpit, twisting the cop's elbow backward against its natural hinge. Miller yelped a clipped, pathetic, "Ah!" His Glock stripped from his grip and flung aside like a plastic toy. For 3 seconds the yard detonated in silence. Then Jerome ripped Miller's wrist down, snapping the last threads of strength in his tendons. Miller's bulk crashed face first onto the blood-slick grass, nose grinding into the wet dirt and dog blood. The handcuffs popped from his fist, bounced, and clattered next to his head, the metallic ring shrill as a funeral bell for the cheap power he'd wielded seconds ago. A voice shrieked from the fence. He dropped him. "Oh my God, keep recording." A trembling hand jabbed a phone closer through the bars, lens crawling inch by inch over Miller's face, smeared with mud, a trickle of blood from his lip, a few stray dog hairs still stuck to his chin. The chest of his uniform was blotched red and brown, bleeding into Shadow's fur like an ink spill on an unwritten will. Grady lunged, clutching Jerome's shoulder, his shout staged for effect. "Stop! Commander Tate, that's enough. You're committing assault." But anyone watching closely could see it, his grip gentle, just for the camera's benefit, not a hint of force to pull Jerome back. And his eyes, as they flicked to Miller, went dark and cold, before snapping back to faux fear for the live stream. Miller groaned on the grass, hands scrabbling at the sod, gasping like a dog with its tail stomped. Grady spread his arms in a mock barrier, peacemaker posture, but his body betrayed him. Zero strength behind the pose. Beyond the fence, the street blazed with phone lights and blinking flashes, a swarm of glass eyes recording every savage frame, ready to blast it citywide in seconds. The night from this heartbeat onward was bleeding out under 1,000 digital witnesses. A kid, maybe 12, clutched a phone so tight his fingers trembled, wide eyes stuck to the live stream. OMG, he knocked the cop down. "Mom, the cop's down." The camera jittered, capturing broken frames. Miller sprawled, face streaked, and a black-shirted man stood over him like a statue, a war god forgot. Behind the iron fence, neighbors jabbed fingers through the gaps, hammering likes, shares, spitting comments that flooded the feed. Who's wrong here? He was just holding his dog. Police brutality. No, he assaulted a cop. That's resisting arrest. Each shout bred 10 more. The comment war raging like fire licking dry timber. In the flickering circle of phone screens, Grady crouched, helping hoist Miller by the shoulders, voice barking hoarse for effect. "Miller's hurt. Everyone back up. This is an active scene. Record if you want, but stay back." He sounded commanding, but his eyes darted sideways, checking every lens on him, polishing the good cop act to feed the script spinning in his head. He's the monster. I'm just the poor rookie trapped between internet wolves. A few steps away, Jerome stood motionless, shoulders heaving under his black shirt soaked in Shadow's blood and Miller's spit blood. He was no longer the image of an old man and his dying dog. He'd become the same Shadow that once haunted Middle Eastern deserts, except tonight the rifles were smartphones. Old Man Berg slammed his cane into the ground, eyes red, voice cracked but loud enough to tear through the bickering. "I served too. I swear on my strips that man's right. He protected his dog. The cops are filthy, abusing power." He coughed hard, but didn't retreat an inch. A pimply teen pressed his phone close to Jerome's face, voice quivering like he was watching a ghost rise. He doesn't look like a criminal. He looks like a warrior come back from the dead." One line in the comment section detonated. "Justice for Shadow! American cops are mafia. Arrest him now. He's a hero." Two tidal waves tearing each other apart under every frame, the truth buried under rage and likes. More sirens wailed from the street corner, red Google strobes slicing through the fog, fresh cuffs waiting for the man who once commanded shadows. In the eye of this chaos, Jerome turned his head, eyes pinning Grady's polished mask. His voice came low and jagged, each syllable a stone dropped into Grady's filthy pond. "Good acting, Grady, but this game's far from over." Wind hissed through the damp grass, brushing against the dozens of cameras locked on his silhouette. A man who had just ripped off the mask of a quiet citizen and stood naked before a hollow justice and a mob hungry for blood. And these clips, in minutes, would roar through the city like a tear no one could stitch back together. The sirens wailed in a relentless chain, an icy funeral procession pouring down a street that had slept undisturbed for years. Patrol car headlights and ambulance beams flayed the iron fence raw, turning the blood-soaked lawn at Jerome's feet into a blinding stage where darkness had nowhere left to hide. A police bullhorn cracked the night open. "Clear the area immediately. All non-essential personnel back. Emergency arrest in progress." Neighbors with phones jolted back but never lowered their arms. Flashes of red, blue, and shaky live stream overlays fought the bark of authority. Grady stepped half Goretter, voice stiff but sugar-coated in the role of order keeper. "Secure the cops, no sudden moves. Hold the perimeter." Two young officers, shoulders quivering under borrowed Kevlar, inhaled sharply, closed in. Jerome didn't flinch. Arms loose at his sides, no struggle, no snarl. Only when the cold click of steel bit into his wrists did he lift his head, eyes spearing the closest lens, asking every gawker outside, "You really think this cheap leash can hold me?" Miller lay strapped on a stretcher, chin sticky with drool and bloody spit, eyes rolling dumb but lips still twitching out threats like a mangy mutt clinging to its stink. "I'll bury him. Law, I'll drag him to court." Each slurred vow fanned fresh whispers at the fence. An old woman rasped under her breath, "Corpse, you shot a man's dog, you bastard." But the megaphone drowned her out before her curse could echo. Grady wiped sweat from his brow, stepping square in front of every freelance camera. "Situation contained. Suspect Jerome Tate will be detained pending a full investigation. All evidence will be reviewed by proper authorities." His eyes never left the rows of lenses aimed like rifle barrels. A flicker glanced at Miller's stretcher, then back to the audience. "I've got this under control." Online, clips chopped tight, Miller face down, the cuffs closing. Uncuffed the old wolf hammering comment, threads raw. In 5 minutes flat, battle lines drew themselves. Animal rights orgs, veteran groups, freelance lawyers rallying behind the dog's ghost. The other side barked, "Assault. Resisting arrest. Protect the badge." The fence-sitters shared it for the clicks. They nudged Jerome into the back of the squad car. Leather seats cracked under his weight. The cuffs clinked a dry king on the metal barrier. The thick plexiglass shield boxed him in, but couldn't cage the flint edge of his stare. He locked eyes through the glass with Grady outside. Red and blue pulsed through the window, carving that look into a blade. Cuffs hold wrists, not ghosts. Across town, a grimy bar perched by the highway flickered its neon sign like a tired eye. Inside, an old TV hung crooked on the wall, replayed the live stream. Jerome cuffed, collar soaked in his dog's blood, chin up, a hashtag crawling beneath. Uncuff the old wolf, a brawny man with a bald dome polished by TV glare, neck webbed in ink, a skull clamped around an old unit insignia. tapped a thick finger on his empty pint. A crooked grin split his stubbled jaw. Jerome Tate? Took you long enough to crawl back into daylight, you old wolf? Behind the bar, the landline shrilled. 3 short, 1 long. The shaky bartender shoved the receiver toward him. He answered without a hello. The other end rasped like rock scraping concrete. You saw it, yeah? They played dirty. Meet at the old warehouse. Same code. I'll wait. No reply, just the slam of the handset, dry and final as a gun butt, wrapping plastic. Miles away, in a private shooting range, another man tugged off his ear protection. His forearm, half hidden by a camo sleeve, flashed a battered Delta dagger tattoo. He picked up his hat, muttering to the shredded paper targets. Tate, you trouble magnet. Time to clean up vermin again. Hat tossed on a bench, he headed for his truck without a backward glance at the young recruits gawking behind him. No slogans were screamed, no trending streams begging for justice. Just a few cold calls, clipped messages, coordinates. Night air seeped through the bar walls, drifted past the cracked lot, and brushed the old warehouse door where they once stashed black market kit. The Delta Ghost Network still breathed, and tonight the claws were flexing for fresh meat. Back under jaundiced lockup lights, Jerome rested his back to a chipped wall, hands still cuffed tight, eyes shut as if sleep had finally dragged him under after a battlefield reborn. But his chest rose calmly, pulse steady, not the ragged pant of a man fearing prison. Inside his skull, a city map unfurled. Sewer routes, dirty cop dens, gun barrels and watchful eyes that needed daylight. A security cam blinked red, catching the split-second flicker of his eyelid. Then both eyes opened, drilling into the lens, colder than every dagger etched on the arms of those gathering for him tonight. No cuff forge could cage this Delta ghost for long, and tonight the chain links were starting to rattle. The holding room glowed a sickly hue under a flickering fluorescent bulb, stale air from an old vent swirling the stench of paperwork and anxious sweat. On a dusty steel table, 3 suited men crowded over folders stamped confidential, the sheets catching the light like thin skin stretched over truths not yet spilled. The lead attorney, hair slicked, blue-striped tie knotted sharp, clicked a metal pen between tense fingers, coiling around the snake of this scandal, looping its tail. Outside the glass slit in the door, a cluster of reporters pressed camera lenses into the gap, red recording lights twitching like hungry pupils. He leaned in, voice syrupy as a cracking sheet of ice. Gentlemen, former Commander Tate is a decorated veteran. This incident is a regrettable misunderstanding. We assure you it will be handled internally. Please refrain from spreading unverified information. He slammed the glass shut, exhaled hard, turned back to the table, his forced smile evaporating the second his eyes locked with Jerome sat stone still. The cuffs were gone, but raw welts ringed his wrists. His hands rested loose on the table, eyes ignoring the documents, ignoring the suits, staring through the barred window where a thin line of sunlight hung free of any leash. The lawyer cleared his throat, voice dropping to a brittle hush. Mr. Tate, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to save you. Believe me, Shadow was bait. If the press digs up your Helmand file, the whole chain of command falls with you. Sign the non-disclosure. We'll clean this up. Quiet exit, everything sealed. Next to him, a young aide unfolded a briefcase, murmuring, "Sweet poison." Commander Tate, think of your brothers still in uniform. If Delta's honor cracks open, they all go down with it. Jerome didn't twitch. His breathing stayed level, bored of lawyer Polish and polished lies. Only when his eyes darkened, pupils turning the hue of a battlefield trench, did his voice grind out, dry as gravel. I'd think of Shadow first. Any bastard in camo who lets scum point a gun at my dog, they can bury their own corpses. The lawyer flinched. His pen fell onto the files. Fumbling, he snapped the papers shut, signaling his aide to pack up, muttering in a snake's hiss. Fine. If you won't play nice, we pivot. Cover what we can. Emergency brief with HQ. We can't let the press bleed out Helmand. When the door sealed behind them, Jerome stayed as he was, fingers drumming the cold steel table, eyes half-lidded like drifting off mid-interrogation. But the angry cuff mark still burned, a reminder to everyone plotting outside they were never gagging a sheep, they were poking a ghost. And ghosts don't fear getting dirt on the metals they rip off. A cracked cafe TV looped the local station's urgent segment, the anchor's tone scraping salt into a wound. Exdelta Force Commander. Brutality or justified defense? The viral clip has sparked heated debate nationwide. The cuts were quick. Shadow's snarl, Miller's drawn gun, the shot, then Jerome's arm snapping a uniformed elbow. A ticker crawled under the brawl. Justice for Shadow tangled with Delta Force brutality. A digital battlefield. Back in the box, the yellow light played across Jerome's weathered face. The lawyer slunk back in, hair messy, tie askew, bloodshot eyes dripping fatigue from hallway war councils. He dropped into the metal chair, leaned close, voice raw from pleading. "Mr. Tate, I beg you. They're tearing open your past. They've got sources deep in the sealed files. If Helmand leaks, the army disowns you overnight. The internet will flip you from hero to butcher." Jerome lifted his eyes from the tile floor, pale but deep enough to drown him. His reply was a slow hammer on a coffin lid. "Tell them I don't negotiate. Let them dig. I owe Shadow. Those vultures outside don't have the beak for my bones." The lawyer's hands trembled, pages flipping loudly against the silence. He stammered for scraps. "You don't get it. That cleanup op, you signed the kill order on embedded intel assets. If they connect that to you, public support vanishes. The army throws you out. You have nothing left." Jerome's smile sliced thin as a paper blade. "Drop me. Drop the metal mask, too. I've got other things to drag out, worse than the truth about one dead dog." In the prison lot, inside a rusted van parked tight against the compound fence, a ring of burly shapes huddled over a flickering phone. A bearded ex-soldier squinted at a fresh text Jerome didn't sign. Old Wolf stays silent, no deal with the suits. He chuckled, exhaled smoke through crooked teeth. Back him up? Nah. Better to peel the army's mask and sniff the stink under it. Boys ready? A row of nods chants no slogans, only the eyes of wolves smelling blood on the wind. Down the hallway, the lawyer clutched the sealed file to his chest, scuttling past a barricade of cameras. Microphones stabbed at his face, questions fired like bullets. Is there a cover-up? Is Helmand code for detainee assassinations? He ducked, waved a limp denial, burrowing through the pack like a rat cornered by hawks. Inside, Jerome stayed planted, back against the chair, eyes shut to the circus. A half smirk ghosted his lips. No one could read if it was exhausted forgiveness or sharpened revenge. His silence tonight was the blade at the throat of every scavenger outside. The night painted the detention block in a dull, breathless gray, walls stale with lime dust and iron sweat. After 10 p.m., the corridor fluorescence sputtered off in segments, leaving only a few nodding guards, ghost silhouettes with holstered guns and eyes that slid away when Grady paused at cell 17. No one asked. No one reported. A door cracked open on the nod of someone in the ranks. Grady slipped inside, easing the door shut like the squeak of a hinge might shred the mask he'd just strapped on out in the hallway. The cell reeked faintly of rusted steel. Jerome's shadow stretched stiff across the wall, unmoved by the bolt snapping shut behind him. Grady dropped his voice, his breath a stew of sweat and stale antiseptic. "Mr. Tate, I don't want to see you suffer more. Please, just once, listen to me. Drop Helmand. Don't drag Miller's name into the light. Take a small charge, a few days, you walk out clean. Trust me." He pulled a cheap plastic chair, crouched opposite, hunched like a scolded youngest son bracing for a father's switch. Eyes pink at the edges, voice cracking mid-syllable, fingers clutched his shirt front like an invisible blade needed pressing down to get the words out. "You don't know. Miller forced my hand. I was just a pawn. I never wanted Shadow dead. Never." Jerome didn't stir. His hands, gnarled like old oak, tapped the dented steel table in a dry, even rhythm. Bullets chambering behind a finger that hadn't forgotten its purpose. Now and then, he glanced at the corner, where the red security cam winked sleepy, but watchful. Grady leaned lower, words leaking through clenched teeth like water through cracked clay. Please, Tate, I get you. I get you. You want justice for Shadow, but justice tonight doesn't care for truth-tellers. I'm begging you, don't pull me in. I'm scared. His shoulders trembled, fingers slipping from his collar to claw at the chair edge, as if he'd grip Jerome's coat if only he dared. The tapping stopped. Jerome drew a single, slow breath. His eyes flickered, deep wells, suddenly flaring ice, then shuddered again. His head tilted, the ghost of a razor's smile cutting his cracked lip. Good act, Grady, but you lie like shit. Grady twitched, jaw clenching before it slackened into a rehearsed, pathetic grin. Don't say that. I'm trying to help you. The next line dropped like a stone off a tin roof, clumsy and hollow, an exposed thread unraveling in a bad script. He tried a shaky sigh, sweat dotting his brow under the cell's dim yellow bulb. Then, as if someone twisted his guts, he snapped upright, voice pitching a step too sharp, the mask slipping. Of course I'm scared. You think I want this? They're too big. Be smart. Serve your time, cash the veteran checks, stop poking the bear. Jerome's face stayed calm, pond water still before a flood. He tilted his head just enough, voice slicing Grady's last veil like gutting a fish. Scared? Then why'd you flick the safety off when you pointed at Shadow? Miller pulled the trigger. Sure, but who primed it, Grady? Forgot already? Color drained off Grady's lips. The corners twitched like a man pinned under stage lights. He sputtered, a paper-thin grin, hands knotting his shirt hem. You were wrong. I reached for the chain. I tried to hold him back. I swear. I didn't want him dead. I swear. Jerome's breath thickened, pupils dark as an oil slick. Hold him back? Or film me begging? You're too green, Grady. Learn your lines better next time. 2 concrete walls away, behind a staff-only door, a maintenance worker hunched by the feed console, fingers hovering over playback keys. He looped Grady's sputtered confessions, archiving every shaky heartbeat, a recording worth more than a room full of bullets. Beneath his sleeve, a faded Delta dagger winked in the overhead wiring glow. Inside the cell, Grady's mask cracked for good. A bead of sweat crawled down his temple. His voice dropped to a torn whisper. I just followed orders. I didn't want him dead. Jerome leaned back, chin dipping in a slow, deliberate nod, a ghost smile flickering like a knife's edge. Good. Then you'll drag those orders into the sun with me. You'll be the rope that strangles them all. No running from it now. Grady shot up as if yanked by a leash, his face locked stiff, lips shaping curses too soft for words. He slipped through the cell door, breath sputtering, a hiss leaking out his clenched teeth. Old mutt, bastard. His footsteps scraped off into the dim corridor. Jerome didn't move, hands clasped, eyes resting half shut like dozing at dawn. Beneath that calm lid, the pit Grady just dug pulsed alive, deep enough to drown every rank outside who thought tonight could still sleep easily. The night, once mute, was coiling to roar again. A drizzling night washed over a city that usually fell asleep early, but that night the entire social network lit up like a spring-loaded trap with no off switch. An anonymous account, just a jumble of numbers, dropped the raw clip, Shadow howling, stepping back, then the gunshot ripping the dark. The shaky camera didn't blur out Miller's hiss. Fucking mutt, shut up or die. Sharp as a knife, unmistakable. Within 2 minutes, the video was copied, re-uploaded hundreds of times in animal rights groups, anti-police channels, rogue political pages, then swept across TikTok like fire on dry grass. A freelance reporter, voice low and dripping sarcasm, went live, frame by frame. Here, look at Miller's fingers squeezing the trigger. Look at the dog backing up. Self-defense my ass. This is dirty joy killing. This is rotten power. Hashtags justice for Shadow and corrupt cops clung to every comment, rocketing up Twitter trends in 15 minutes flat. Facebook and TikTok's top searches burst into memes. Miller's face pasted on a wolf's body, captions screaming dog killer cop sinking teeth into the fury of people who'd never even seen Shadow alive. life. A slogan bloomed overnight. Shadow never bites. It morphed into profile frames, story stickers, and graffiti murals splashed with fresh red paint. At first, a handful of mainstream outlets scrambled to yank the clip, citing ongoing investigation. But the public wasn't buying the whitewash. For every post taken down, 10 more sprouted like weeds. The pressure crushed newsroom desks. By midnight, the city's biggest paper reluctantly pushed a headline that nearly begged forgiveness. Internal affairs to probe dog shooting amid viral uproar. Comments flooded beneath. People screaming for justice, cursing the badge, promising shirts printed with Miller the Mutt Killer. Inside the police HQ, the PR room burned neon through dawn. A deputy chief slammed his palm on the desk until his voice rasped to gravel. Comments, lockdown failed. They're sharing raw links through Telegram. We can't plug the leak. The public's not stupid anymore. Suspend Miller. Now, drag Grady out for the cameras. Parade him as our good conscience cop. Maybe we salvage a shred of trust. The next morning, an official post went up. Officer Miller suspended pending investigation. We commit to full transparency. But the net didn't hush. Comments swarmed the page. Suspended. Arrest him. Miller's free. Shadow's buried. Fire him. Stop gaslighting us. Each takedown of the original video only pushed justice for Shadow higher. The sleepless night raged on. But a mob with phones never tired. Grady, the same man who'd trembled at Jerome's cell door just hours before, now stood lacquered in fresh-pressed uniform at the station steps, cameras hungry for every flinch. His tie dark, hair slicked back, eyes blinking rehearsed grief. I was devastated to see Shadow shot. I saw it all. I tried to stop my colleague, but it was too late. I promise full cooperation to bring truth and justice for Shadow. A torrent of live comments spat back. Fake tears. You cocked the gun for Miller, now you're crying. You're worse than him. At least he didn't fake remorse. At the same hour, a ring of veterans under a masked account fired up an encrypted live stream. The camera framed only 3 backs hunched at a wooden table. On the wall, the raw clip of Shadow collapsing next to an old battlefield map of Helmand. A ragged voice cracked through cigarette haze. Listen close. Miller's just rusted bait. They threw you to calm the riot. The real pigs sit higher. They did the same filth in Helmand. If you want justice for Shadow, you better demand justice for innocent blood, too. The internet split 3 ways. One horde foamed for Miller's public hanging. Another clawed Grady's pass clips, piecing together a breadcrumb trail. Classic scapegoat. The third watched the old vets, whispering suspicions. Are these guys so clean? Who ran Helmand? Clip breakdowns swarmed TikTok, Reddit, and Discord. Comment wars detonated round the clock. On a scrappy indie podcast, a hooded lawyer with a smoker's growl lobbed gasoline on the bonfire. You think Shadow was just a dog? You think Miller shot it on a whim? Ask the real question, who ordered it? Why silence the dog's owner? Jerome Tate, the same man who ran the Helmand cleanups? This clip might drag a whole rotten web screaming into daylight. Meanwhile, Miller curled under the eaves of his dingy home, curtains drawn to blot out the rain and a swarm of reporters pounding the door. A hidden cam guy, hood up, lens jammed at the wood. Miller, who ordered the shot? Answer, whose leash are you on? A snap photo. Miller's pale face, mouth open mid-swear, door slammed in panic. Within minutes, the image mutated into a viral meme. The guard dog scared of real dogs. A new hashtag sank its fangs in behind Justice for Shadow. Who ordered the shot? Another row of teeth shredding the department's PR team. By dawn, in the dark gut of an abandoned warehouse, a flickering yellow bulb cast shadows over a battered Helmand battle map, inked in angry red scribbles. Shadow's shooting clip looped on a side screen. 4 broad silhouettes sat silent, arms folded. A gravelly voice dragged through smoke. Time to gut them open. Outside, the night no longer hissed on screens alone. This time it sharpened claws, bared fangs, and growled for real blood. News began leaking like an oil slick from a tabloid rag owned by a kingpin known for gutting secrets and selling the carcass to headline vultures. That morning, its front page screamed in fat black letters across dingy gray pulp, "Jerome Tate, Delta Force hero or dirty hitman." Below it, a grainy black and white photo, a slice of Hellman's dirt camp years ago, scattered corpses and patchwork fatigues, mud and blood smeared into ghost shapes. No context, no orders. Just red arrows, red circles, and red captions, redder than blood. This man ordered 15 kills. No trial, no sentence, no apology. In a tiny street corner cafe, the TV speaker wheezed, "A special report." A scruffy military blogger reclined smug in his chair, voice dipped in pretend expertise. Hellman was a stain. Shadow's death? Maybe karma finally showed up for him. Under the clip, comment wars frothed and spread like a plague. Bigger accounts twisted the once defiant Shadow Never Bites into Shadow Killer, splicing Shadow's limp body with gore from Hellman. Inside a dim conference room, Grady nursed a cup of plain water, muttering to himself, "Perfect. Let their mouths do what bullets couldn't." He didn't say much, but the leaks trickled steadily, a snake biting its own tail. Reporters camped outside the detention center, shoving mics at guards. Is Tate still a hero, or just a bloody blade with a Delta badge? In the clammy cell, Jerome sat cross-legged on the metal bench, a printout of the tabloid shoved under his door, cheap ink still damp under his calloused thumb. He flipped page by page, eyes drilling into the words "Dirty Hitman" stamped over and over like nails into his spine. A cracked fingernail scraped a torn corner, dragging up a faint smear of old blood. His breathing stayed steady, deep enough to press calm into his gut. Through the door slit, a guard flinched at how Jerome bit down on his own lips, the way an old beast licks a wound, waiting for rage to claw back up its throat. Jerome folded the paper, set it neat by his boot heel, spine pressing against cold cement. His rasp drifted out, low but sharp enough to slice into every surveillance mic wired overhead. "You want to bury me with my own blood? Fine, choke on it. Swallow every drop." That line slipped through the guard's mic, carried straight to whoever was listening. Outside, a new hashtag crawled up the ranks. But at the base of that trend, a knot of old soldiers tapped out a short-coded blast. "Gut them. Old Wolf doesn't howl alone." A late-night political podcast rocketed up the charts hours after airing. A so-called former Delta instructor snarled into his mic, "Tate, not a hero, just a hit squad commander. No judge, no jury, just bullets. Go ahead, prove me wrong." The hosts, always braying about freedom of speech, fanned it with fake innocence. So, Shadow's death? Poetic justice? Who cries for Hellman's ghosts? Snipped clips buzzed across Facebook groups, veteran forums. Younger ex-soldiers, men who once took orders under Tate, now cushioned behind desk jobs and kids, began ghosting group chats. Little blue ticks winked out. They feared old nights being dragged back. Wives seeing grainy pics of husbands kneeling in sand with a rifle but no permission slip. They severed contact with Jerome, with each other, with everything that smelled like desert nights and dog tags. In a weathered cabin on the city's edge, Jerome's ex-wife cracked her door to a knock she didn't trust. 3 reporters, hidden mics stitched into collars, oozed poison with polite smiles. "He once beat innocents, didn't he? Did you know about that detainee night?" She slammed the door so hard it rattled loose paint. But their laughter crawled through the crack. "A dead dog won't whitewash a killer's past, ma'am. You know that, right?" Elsewhere in the city, Miller lay flat in a hospital bed, IV stuck in his wrist. His lips tasted of bitter meds, but his hiss still dripped venom. Good. Let justice bury him, like he buried Hellman in blood. Shadow's dead, so what? He wheezed a laugh, clutching the bedsheet, eyes blurring just enough to catch a TV caption flicker. "Tate, the bloody commander." All night, Comment storms battered every old post. Shadow never bites? Ha? A gentle dog guarding a monster? Same teeth. A fresh hashtag bloomed ugly. Shadow killer. Memes splicing Tate's grim face onto Hellman's dirt, overlaying Shadow's limp fur with one crime breeds another. Inside the detention block, the nightlight feigned sleep. A guard hunched in a corner flicked open his phone, texted out, "They want him punished." No one left on his side. In his cell, Jerome hunched, knees up, head bowed like nodding off. But watch long enough and you'd see the tremor in his shoulders wasn't fear. It was a blade grinding on stone. The wolf they blackened was coiling to bite back. But first it listened, letting the pack outside howl itself raw. Down a corridor's blind spot, where the CCTV flickered worst, three shadows bunched shoulder to shoulder like dusk-fed wolves. No medals, no flashy insignia, just faded jackets pinned with an old Delta Squad patch, stitches nearly gone gray. One tugged open a battered backpack, pulling a yellowed stack of plastic-wrapped orders. On the cover, Hellman, verbal orders, no archive. He flipped the first page, jabbing a finger at a streaky ink signature. The big brass who once spat the kill line, clean house, no witnesses. Another cracked open a battered laptop, eyes locked on the black screen while his fingers pecked code. They want to play honor games? Good. I want the bastards who washed their hands over our blood to crawl again. In the cell just paces away, Jerome sat still, eyes wide open under the hiss of night air through the bars. A sliver of wind flicked a silver hair across his brow. His mouth twisted, not a laugh, not a snarl, but a clean slice, gums showing blood thread at the seam. Play clean on my blood, drink it till you choke, you suits. On the laptop, a 10-minute exposé stitched itself, snapshots of hidden orders, blurred shots of bodies bagged by Delta squads, a shaky recording just clear enough to spit out a general's bark. Clean it all, no witnesses, no loose ends. Not Jerome's voice, never was. A gravelly throat asked behind the glow, "We dropping this tonight, boys. Old wolf's blood is enough. Time for the snakes to puke bile." Another flipped up a hoodie, jammed a USB stick in, lips curling. Drop it. Let him burn. Outside, the feed still snapped and jeered. Shadow Killer ruled the search bar. The memes swung Tate's face like a dirty rag. But under that muck, a nail waited to blow the lid. Night wind nosed through the cell bars, rustling the crumpled tabloid at Jerome's spine. He murmured it again, spit turned curse. "Bury me in my past? Wrong grave, you cowards. I'll dig my knife in your throat first." A live broadcast ticked in a dusty corner, a blood-red countdown. Hellman, the truth they buried. The storm would hit back, claws out. From a pack that never forgot how to howl when the snakes thought the dark was theirs alone. The prison block hunched under the last gasp of seasonal wind, hallway lights sputtering, sometimes bright, sometimes flickering, shadows of bored guards stretching long on the cell doors like dull knives guarding whatever scraps of life remained inside. Inside cell 17, Jerome didn't sleep, his back pressed cold concrete, neck damp with sweat, even though the stale air cracked skin dry. His mind unwound slowly, his old film, spooling backward to that Hellman night when desert sand scoured his eyelids raw, his Delta Force unit back then, boots slogging through puddles thick as blood, radios spitting the order like a gold-tipped bullet. Clean it all, no witnesses, no leaks. To young men, then, it sounded noble. Kill to save the company, protect the flag stitched to your chest. He believed it. Brothers at his shoulder, some cracked jokes. One cracked open a canteen while blood still steamed. Minutes later, a mind snapped back. He felt bone splinter under his palm. Smelled burnt flesh mixed with diesel fumes. Then that one shard that punched his ribs and lodged in his lung. A souvenir the surgeon never pulled. An old splinter that burned every night the weather turned. In that stale cage, Jerome's eyes lifted to the ceiling, lids heavy with old smoke, but not sleep. Dry lips split to a whisper, a blade under the skin of every mask they tried to drape over him now. One wrong faith, they never forgive you for it. His rough hand slipped under his threadbare shirt, finding that puckered scar pulsing with his breath. The skin dipped, the muscle beneath knotted up like rope gone stiff. He pressed it, felt the bite, made himself feel it. A reminder, the cost of honor they promised you glowed brighter than any Delta patch. Outside, the roof gutters dripped old rain. Wind clawed through rusted window bars. But inside his chest, that buried splinter ticked like a second heart, reminding him it wasn't enemy fire that killed a man like him. It was blind faith that slit his throat long before any bullet. A soft, metallic clink tapped from the cell door hinge, like someone drumming a throat in the dark. Jerome's eyes snapped open. He pushed off the wall, spine stiff, but feet planted square, ready to smash earth, ready for the steel if they dared swing the gate open now. His breath misted in the draft, eyes fixed beyond the bars. No more desert, no more tinny radio begging clean it all. Now it was clearer than ever, a parade of fish-slick faces shaking hands, feeding poison to the press, looping the same leash and tightening it when they thought he'd crawl. He muttered, each word a hammer blow for the rats sniffing in the hallway. You wrap the leash around my neck again, waiting to yank, when I'm too weak to bite back. His hand, battered and calloused, clamped his knee. That palm once clenched a trigger, once flipped dead comrades off a flatbed, once peeled canvas over bodies they never named out loud. He'd trusted that hand to obey honor, and it dug him down into this mud pit deeper than any grave. Now, that same hand drew a line in his mind. I ain't a dog. I ain't a knife. I'm the hand that holds it. Outside, an army of leaks and cheap hashtags, boardroom barons sweating behind squeaky clean masks, old squad mates gone soft pretending not to remember his call sign. They'd woven a new leash from rumor, headline, dirty lens flare, and 1,000 screaming comment threads. A red security bulb blinked above. The camera still watched, still hoping to catch the old beast gnawing his chain. But the guard behind the monitor didn't see Jerome's eyes anymore, half closed with fatigue. They were open now, the eyes of an old wolf whose fangs had pressed back through loose skin, ready to shred metal, bone, and the hand that dares tighten the rope again. Near dawn, wind clawed through the bars, slapping at his thin collar. Jerome crouched tighter to the wall, palms clasped on his knees, his cheekbones shadowed under the flicker. His breath slowed, cold air ironing the embers, clawing at his skull. Elmond, just inkrot on tabloid pulp, squealed out by slur-mouthed experts, but inside his ribcage, the old fragment shifted like a living thing. Each heartbeat stabbed it deeper, a pain he clung to because it reminded him, blind faith bleeds you dry again and again if you never rip it out yourself. Dry mouth cracking at the edge, Jerome clenched his jaw, hissed into the chill. I carried the blood, I'll spill the rest. He bowed his head, forehead brushing his braced fists. His lungs drew steady, heavy, like boots stepping slowly right before the door splinters open. Every ghost of Hellman slammed down with the ashes of shadow on the porch he'd never see again. From now on, no chain, no badge, no hero's medal could clamp him back in the muzzle. Outside these concrete ribs, a scattered handful of veterans watched their trucks, radios muffled in foil wrap. One nodded, voice a grave whisper into the mic. Commanders primed. Tomorrow night we drop it. Let the snakes bleed. Inside Jerome's chest, the old shard pulsed, sharp as a dagger not yet forged right. But his eyes tonight bore no regret, no pleading softness, only that streak of steel, long enough to slit any throat that thought to brand him prey again. Morning dragged pale mist over cracked yard fences. A guard, cradling his first cup of bad coffee, sneaked a peek through the vented hatch. He glimpsed Jerome's back, spine hunched like a wolf's ridge in snow, squared against the scar that never healed. A wolf had chewed his leash, and now the fangs waited for the traitors soon to bay for mercy just outside the walls. Flashbulbs and camera lenses had been perched outside since midnight, the moment rumors of Tate's release clawed their way to the top of every feed. No longer were the crowds howling for his head like the day he'd been cuffed and dragged into a patrol car. Tonight, their mouths spat a new script. Keep him alive. Make him name names. Who's dirty? Who shot Shadow? Who bled Hellman? Shadow Never Bites crawled back into trend columns, but its subtext was sharpened now. Justice needs a witness. A young lawyer, boyish face hidden behind thick glasses, trembled as he raised a sheaf of paper to the guard. His voice tried for steady, but his throat was dry paper. Temporary release for extended investigation. He's not pardoned. He's a living witness. No guard argued. They barely nodded, because beyond the gate, dozens of microphones pressed through iron bars like spear tips at a ruin, still breathing. Inside, Jerome didn't bother with a fresh shirt. His inmate jacket, collar yellowed, hung loose over one shoulder as he stepped through the antiseptic corridor. When the steel door finally groaned open, the hinge squealed like a leash falling off an old dog's neck. Flashbulbs scorched his face, scarred cheekbones, hollows for eyes that drilled clean through the lens, flaying the glassy skin of the broadcast feed. A reporter lunged in, mic out. "Mr. Tate, how does freedom feel?" He halted, mouth hard, then exhaled low, as if muttering only for the night wind licking through the bars. "I owe no one for this door." In the swarm outside the fence, a blacked-out SUV lurked among the press vans. Inside, Grady pinched a cigarette filter, phone snug to his jaw, voice a whisper sharp enough for the other end. Let him run free. Every step shows his tail. The old wolf bristles easily, and he's easier to aim at when he thinks he's loose. Jerome's boots thudded down the stone steps, each heel drop sparking a storm of camera flashes trailing in his wake. A veteran by the waiting car eased open the back door, fingers brushing Jerome's elbow like lifting a warm shell casing. Jerome didn't shove him off, didn't thank him either. He sank into the frayed seat fabric on his own terms. As the car crawled off, reporters' questions clattered like hail on the windows. Jerome stared through the tinted glass, not at the mob, not back at the prison walls receding behind, but straight into the night ahead. A wolf unlashed, not to curl up in some den, but to rip out more of the dark this time, and leave no one standing to leash him again. Rounding the last dirt bend, the skeleton of Jerome's old house loomed beneath a nest of black trees. The porch step still bore a dark, rain-scabbed stain. Where Shadow's blood had dried into the wood, moss furred the edges like an old wound refusing to scab over clean. Jerome swung the car door wide without waiting for a hand. His foot slipped a little on wet grass, but he sank to one knee on the porch plank, where Shadow once bayed hoarse before choking on his own blood. One calloused hand pressed flat the damp timber, scraping lightly as if patting the ghost of a spine still warm. His shoulders jolted once, enough for the cold wind to gnaw his nape, but no sob escaped him. The door groaned open to stale damp. No lights, no stove warmth. Only a jittery flashlight beam bounced as he swept it over cracked linoleum. Jerome peeled back an old rug, pried up a floorboard, and lifted out iron boxes sheathed in black plastic. One corner broke, yellowed pages peeking. Supply logs from Hellman nights. Another box rattled loose, a battered cassette, smudged label, radio log, ops clean. Wind sliced through the shutters. The flashlight stuttered across old drywall, like fragments of old memory flicking across the back of his eyes. Jerome didn't flinch. He snorted once, a grim chuckle, and dragged out a small camera. He turned it on himself, gravel voice rolling out one blunt oath. "If I die before I spill these bones, this stash floods every newsroom in this city. Mark it." Outside, in the tree-lined darkness, scattered veteran silhouettes held their perimeter. A muffled squawk crackled from a duct-taped radio. "Alpha eyes on. Wolf's digging. Keep the yard clean. No more backstabs." A small patrol dog circled the outer fence, whined softly. A living howl, where Shadow's dried mark clung under the porch. Inside, Jerome sat flat against the cool floorboards, the only warmth seeping from the pile of files he'd just crushed, his bones so old they'd fossilized, now clawed back up to break, gut, and be hurled at the suits who once buried him alive a second time. In the kitchen lamp flicked a dull gold on the scarred tabletop. Papers blotched with damp sprawled edge to edge, reports stacked on bank slips, stacked on hush lists. Beside them, a half-drained mug of stale coffee. He hunched forward, the chair creaking under each shift of his shoulders as he scratched red lines across names. Page by page, each call sign crossed, each hush money transfer slashed through. With every stroke, his old wound throbbed under ribs, that splinter whispering Hellman's truth back at him. You have nothing left to lose. Be the knife, not the shield. The lamp flickered as wind needled through the shutters. Jerome's shadow stretched over the floor, merging with a faint second shape, the ghost dog who once lay curled here, head heavy on his boot. He exhaled. The pen dropped. His knuckles grazed the box's lip, sealing the papers tight again. His mouth twitched a weary grin, honed sharp like a fresh blade. Tomorrow I open for you. Justice doesn't come gift-wrapped. It reeks of old blood, still warm. Outside, grass hissed with night whispers. A vet on the perimeter whispered into his radio. Wolf locked the bones. Tomorrow, the snakes taste fang. Inside, Jerome leaned back, head tipping toward the shadowed corner of the kitchen. There, between the lamp's weary flicker and the wall's soot smear, Shadow's ghost seemed to sprawl once more, jaw on paw, guarding the last vigil while the old wolf sorted through the filth man called honor. Tomorrow, the traitors would choke on real blood, not stale hashtags, and this time the howl would tear straight through their skulls. A jaundiced desk lamp cast its sickly glow across the worn face of the senior officer, his tilted cap shadowing half a pair of eyes seasoned to dirt and whispers. Before him, Grady stood statue still, uniform crisp except for the damp shoulder seam where hallway drizzle had seeped through. Between them lay a desk buried in towers of paper, the top sheet a psyche valve for Jerome Tate, fresh red stamp bleeding like a slit chicken's neck. The officer's voice rasped, not warm enough to sound fatherly, not cold enough to frighten, just the habitual tone of a man who'd spoon-fed young men death warrants for decades. You end him clean. No evidence, no leaked footage. I need the public docile before the election. Miller's the bone to toss the vultures. Tate's the knife we snap off. You're the blade. Cut. Grady didn't salute, didn't nod. He just dipped his chin. Eyes, flinty as filed steel. Words flicked through clenched teeth. I'll silence him. He won't get out a single word. The office door thumped shut behind him. In the corridor's stale light, Grady thumbed his phone awake. Rain-speckled ceiling lamps swept his hair slick against his skull. The line picked up before the first ring finished. He hissed orders fast and flat. Evac Miller's family to the outskirts. Burn their old numbers. Lock down old feeds. I'll handle the rest. He snapped the phone shut, tossed it in a hallway bin, and ground it to slivers under his boot heel. Outside, drizzle misted the concrete steps. He let it drip off his nose, his lips, unfazed. Beneath the street lamp, his shadow stretched oily on wet pavement, long, sharp, the ghost of a knife unsheathed, hungry for the throat that would finish the arc. The boy-faced rookie the public pitied now, hardened to granite, only his eyes alive, like a chambered round, sniffing the charge, itching for the trigger's click. He yanked open the SUV's door, settled behind the wheel. The rear seat lumped under a coarse blanket, beneath which glinted the corner of a black duffel. Latex gloves, an oiled suppressor, a roll of duct tape, tools curled like fangs in a closed jaw, waiting for him to bear them. Rain ticked the windshield in a lazy tempo. Inside, only Grady's knuckles tapped the steering wheel. A pulse, waiting for the scent of blood. Orders received, scapegoat mask shed. Only the storm remained to growl for him tonight. Dawn smeared itself gray over soaked city rooftops, a crooked sun clawing past swollen clouds. Miller, mouth bandaged, tape-stained with crusted red, was pushed out like a sorry apology for the net's raid. His uniform bagged around a hollow frame, eyes dull. He croaked 3 words, I will, before 2 suits lifted him bodily into an armored van. A mic bounced off a rain puddle with a wet smack. Before anyone could spin it clean, raw clips poured into every shouty newsfeed. Miller walks, promises to expose Tate, social feeds brayed like hens over spoiled grain. Shadow never bites. Lol, busted. Erase the old killer. Trust cops. One day your dog, next day your neck. A few blocks off, in a shuttered cafe stripped to mold and echoes, 3 old war dogs huddled at a busted window, headsets plugged in, eyes glued to a live rooftop cam. One rasped between smokers' hacks. It's bait, plain as day. Draw him out where they can clip him easily. A secure ping zipped straight to Jerome's pocket. He read the text, thumb brushed the screen, then set the phone on the rain-slick wood. A grin ghosted the side of his jaw, quiet enough to cut glass. I won't run. Rotting meat? I carve it myself. Outside the warped house wall, Grady flattened himself under the dripping eaves, palm brushing the oil-slick suppressor. He crouched low, knee grazing a planter, breath throttled to fog up his safety lenses, just a whisper. In this drizzle's hush, Grady was no longer the trembling officer screaming, "Don't shoot the dog!" Just a hunting hound stuffed into a man's skin, fang sharp and muzzle calm. A rooftop cam pivoted slowly, its red eye blinking once. An unspoken nod. In the earpieces of the cafe squad, a deep voice drummed. "He's here. Do we crush or reel?" A big man spat his gum through a cracked pane, lip curling. "Let him crawl in. Any hand in a wolf's den snaps first." Radio slid along the kitchen window, fingers flicked the curtain hem, brushing a burn hole left over from cigarettes smoked in quieter sins. His fingertip nudged the trigger cradle, giving the piece one polite squeeze, a last handshake before blood's real heat. Rain needled the tin roof, whispered through shingles so weary they might weep red instead of water by dawn. The camera framed it all. One who was hunted, one who would exhume the coffin, one paid to slam the lid tight, and a cabin too stubborn to die. Walls hoarding secrets across more storms than its ghosts could count. Tonight would bleed. Who'd mop it up and who'd drown in it? No one dared bet sober coin on that. Miller rushed back to the temporary apartment on the city's outskirts while the drizzle still soaked the air, clutching his gun like a talisman to keep his coward's lungs from bursting into a scream. He locked the front door with 3 bolts, deadbolts, and crossbars, mistyped the code twice until the red warning light flashed wildly. The kitchen light flicked on. His shadow crouched under the dining table like a child afraid of ghosts, the gun waving at every patch of darkness, heart pounding against his ribs while his mouth kept swallowing dry air like burnt straw. The hallway camera outside the door flared with a warning blink. Out of the corner of his eye, Miller caught a dark shape gliding past and vanishing behind the stairwell wall. He swallowed dry, mind screaming, "Grady? Reporters? That damn old man?" Sweat soaked his fingertips. The gun quivered so hard it was no longer steel for comfort but a useless brick in his hand. The front door stayed deadlocked, but Miller forgot about the side door leading to the narrow fire escape. The hinge had jammed for a month unoiled, so it gave just the faintest click. A sinewy hand silently twisted the bolt, turning it as quietly as a cat sliding claws over old wooden floorboards. Miller felt a draft slip through the kitchen, a cold bite crawling under his feet. Before he could lift his head, the dark figure was already standing in the middle of the tiled floor. Tall, broad-shouldered, coat soaked in rain streaks, breathing steady like waves before a storm. The old man's eyes, just one blink, and they sliced through the coward's skin wrapped over Miller's face. No shout, no curse, only a raspy breath lowering right next to Miller's ear, carrying the click of clenched teeth that chilled him to the marrow. "You know what I want, and you know exactly what I'll cut to get it." Miller gasped, throat knotting up, hand on the gun spasming like a rat snapping a trap. At last, he gave a strangled sob, flung the gun aside, shoulders curling in as if ready to have his skin peeled right there, his mouth twisted, teeth chattering. Don't, I'll tell everything. Swear. Jerome didn't bother to interrupt. He reached out, grabbed Miller's collar, slammed him face down on the cold tile floor, the knife tip sliding along the stainless steel counter with a sharp hiss, enough for Miller's eyes to shoot a dry bolt of terror straight down his spine. Jerome's words dropped one by one like a hammer on an anvil. Talk. How did Grady tie you up? Everything in one breath. Hold it if you have to. Save the oxygen. Outside the glass door, the rain thinned. The wind shifted and distant thunder rumbling a promise of a new storm before dawn. But inside this cramped kitchen, the storm was ready to burst long before the sky broke light. Miller cowered on the kitchen floor, head knocked against the cabinet edge, lips trembling, until an old crack split open, bleeding dry again. His breath coiled, hissing through clenched teeth that wouldn't shut. Jerome's blade still skimmed the stainless counter edge, stroking the neck of a rat cornered against the wall. He didn't dare bluff any longer. Pathetic words tumbled out, broken like snapped bones. I did it on Grady's orders. He promised me papers to leave the country. I kept the original tapes. I didn't dare erase them. I was scared. I only flipped the safety off. I didn't kill Shadow. Jerome listened, neither nodding nor shaking his head, only angling the knife a fraction more, the steel catching a wet glint just as the wind howled sharply through the window bars. The curtain whipped up, smacking the tile floor with a crack, like peeling back the liar's mask beneath Jerome's boot. His command came, lower than the wind. Left cabinet, bottom shelf, drag out the hard drives, every USB, every paper Grady stuffed in your mouth to gag me. Miller crawled on all fours, hands trembling like dipped in ice water, dragging out a chipped wooden box. Inside, stacks of hard drives, wrapped in silver tape, a few old black USBs, and a pile of smeared printouts, stamped with a cheap fake red seal. He shoved the whole lot forward at Jerome's feet, like a rat offering itself to a snake. Blubbering, stammering, I didn't have the guts to cross you. They forced me. I was scared. I just wanted to run. Jerome exhaled. Not quite a laugh, not anger either. More like a hunting beast that had clamped the prey's throat but hadn't bothered to eat it yet. He bent down, brushed the fake papers aside, lifted a hard drive up to the dawn light beginning to cut through the dull gray sky outside the window. In that silvery gloom, Jerome's face reflected off the old metal. A silver-haired wolf, eyes misted with old blood, hand clutching fresh proof, ready to unleash the storm. He muttered like a curse, voice gravelly enough to smother Miller's whimpering for good. Dawn's here, Miller, but your road's ended. Live and open your mouth as my witness, or I dig a hole and bury you next to Grady. Choose. Miller couldn't choke out a word, just nodded frantically, throat croaking like a chicken under a butcher's grip. Jerome packed up the drives, USBs and forged papers into a tight bundle, tucking it inside his battered coat. He stood up, his shadow stretching across the doorstep. A pale newborn sun tore through the drizzle, casting his shape along the concrete hallway, lean but solid as a living pillar of stone. Behind him, Miller collapsed onto the floor, body crumpled like a torn sack, sweat, tears, and rainwater pooling across the cold tile. The night's storm had retreated, but under Jerome's boot, a new tempest had only begun to turn over, promising to rip off the rotten roof that the festering snakes still mistook for a safe fortress. The rain had stopped at some point, leaving only droplets clinging to the roof edge, dripping onto the patchy wooden porch with soft creaks. Inside the house, with its rotting walls, Jerome sat motionless at a scarred wooden table. On the tabletop, the silver-taped hard drive and two tarnished USB sticks lay side by side like chunks of lead buried in old ashes. He plugged them in and booted up an ancient computer whose cooling fan whined like a grasshopper with a ruptured belly. The screen flickered on, stuttering with horizontal white lines, a sickly blue glow lighting up his hollow, tired eye sockets, but the tendons in his neck still still held, as firm as whetstone. A recording file named OP_Helmand_22 played. The speakers crackled. The old commander's voice cut through with a military bark sharp enough to slice fog. Team 5, flank left. Team 7, secure target, no witnesses. A strange frequency cut in, a metallic screech like coded Morse that scraped a cold line up Jerome's spine, as if someone had dragged a rusty blade along his old shoulder bone. He leaned over, lit a cigarette, the smoke curling over strands of gray-streaked hair. His eyes stayed locked on the flickering screen. Scrolling through folders named for soldiers, payroll sheets, hastily scanned special commendation memos scribbled by hand, a compressed file popped up just as the fan gave a dying groan. Support team payroll, Grady_approval, SGX. Just a few words, but enough to make one corner of Jerome's mouth twitch. He slowly scrolled down the list. Transfer amounts from a suspicious fund, bypassing official disbursement channels, spread evenly among a squad labeled Cleanup Unit, with Grady as the direct approver. Each line item flickered like an ember in an ash heap that people had long thought cold. Jerome crushed his cigarette hard into a wooden ashtray. The ember hissed out with a sharp pop, leaving a thin wisp drifting along his stubbled chin. His callous fingers drummed on the table, papers stacked neatly into a pile like bones of dead soldiers arranged after a filthy order. A raspy voice slipped from his throat, barely louder than the draft hissing through the door cracks. "You burned every piece of my memory, but forgot this ash still holds heat." His eyes narrowed as the cursor stopped on Grady's name, right next to the line, Black Fund Approved. At the dry edge of his lips, an ugly smile twitched to life, then died like a spark too damp to catch fire. The bait was clear, and the old beast knew he had just peeled back the skin covering the snake coiled and waiting to strike. The hard drive whirred on like an old cricket tucked under a rusty tin roof. Jerome slotted in the second yellowing USB. The screen flickered, then settled on a grainy covert video. A dim office light, two figures standing over a cluttered desk. One was the senior officer whose face Jerome could carve from memory. The other was Grady, that slightly hunched neck, the hand spreading out papers, pen slicing across payout orders without once lifting his head in doubt. He replayed the clip, rolling back and forth over the frame of Grady's bowed head, signing, the lamp glare catching his fingerprint pressed on the edge of a brown envelope. He zoomed in tight, Jerome's eyes locking onto the crooked scrawl, cross-matching each wobbly letter with the Grady_approval line from the payroll sheet just uncovered. Every mouse click echoed in the timber room like nails hammered into a coffin lid, crisp, brutal, wasting no breath. He leaned back in the chair, dragged in the last hit from his cigarette, held the smoke until it scorched his throat, then exhaled and tapped the butt against a ceramic ashtray with a sharp clink. Words leaked through his clenched teeth, aimed at no one yet cold enough to freeze the wind rattling the door. A clever dog guards the house, but it'll bite its master when hungry. His calloused fingers fumbled for the phone beside the pile of scrap paper. He typed out a message. The video of Grady, the payroll file, the Helmand recording logs, all zipped into a fresh data packet, pinned with a terse line fired into the veteran group chat. Bates fat, ready to choke the leash holder. He didn't wait for replies. In a parallel browser tab, Jerome sent the package to 3 anonymous storage nodes, replicating it like a swarm of termites slipping through the rotting walls. Each file dispatched was another blade slicing tighter around the snake that had been swallowing its own tail in the dark for a decade. Outside the window, dawn now carved clear, wiping the filthy night clouds into streaks of silver, promising a noon sun. But inside, Jerome's face stayed half buried, half revealed under the deep shadow of the sagging porch roof. The old scar slashed from cheekbone to jaw showed plain against his weathered skin, a reminder. This wolf had gnawed on ashes half his life, but its fangs were back, and today it would rip the snake's head clean off, before that snake could ever coil a noose around its neck again. Miller curled up tight against the edge of the motel bed, the bleach-scented blanket wrapped around his chest like a torn cocoon. He had never felt a night stretch this long. Not even the night shadow howled for the last time. In his head, Jerome's voice still hissed through clenched teeth, shredding his coward's mask. "You're still breathing because I allow it." He'd tried to run, caught a taxi to the late-night bus terminal, but 3 rings from Grady's phone call blocked every escape route. On the other end, Grady's voice slithered like a snake breathing through grass. "Sleep, Miller. I'll pick you up tomorrow. Passport's ready. Once you're out, you're clean. Got it?" Miller swallowed hard, nodding furiously even though Grady couldn't see him, whispering like a prayer. Yeah, Grady, please get me out." Hanging up, he dragged himself back to bed, kicked off his shoes under the frame, then climbed up clutching the backpack that still reeked of the papers Jerome had ripped out of him. The only thing he believed now was that Grady would take him away. He rested his head on the backpack's strap, mumbling nonsense prayers until exhaustion numbed the fear and dragged his eyelids down. Out in the motel hallway, Grady's shadow pooled like spilled ink on the grimy wall. He crouched under a dead camera, slipping on a black leather mask and snug rubber gloves. A small dagger, wrapped in silk, its steel hilt worn smooth, sat nestled in his palm. A side window cracked open from a loose latch, just wide enough for Grady to slide half his body through, soundlessly. Inside, Miller's breath puffed shallowly, a foot twitching in half-sleep. Grady knelt at the bed's edge, lifeless eyes sweeping from the backpack strap to Miller's collar. One hand carefully unzipped the bag, fingers fishing out a stack of papers. Payout orders, relocation memos, dirty payroll. The other hand pressed the dagger's pommel tight against his thigh, the blade sliding out with a dry click. A stray gust swept through the window crack. Miller stirred, an arm slipping off the backpack strap, eyelids flickering as if the sleeping animal caught a whiff of fresh blood. Grady froze, the dagger tip just 2 knuckles from Miller's jugular. His breath hitched halfway up his chest, a cold shiver crawling down his nape, a tremor stalling the blade's descent. In the darkness, everything thickened like tar. Only Miller's warmth pulsed damp against the dagger's spine, mingled with Grady's own stench of treachery, pickled deep in his gut. One cheap motel night, one coward on the verge of losing his head, and one man with a snake tucked in his pocket, hesitating to cut the cord tying up his filthy web. Grady leaned fully over the mattress, the dagger edge skimming Miller's throat, breath heavy with stale cigarettes and fear sweat. He clenched his teeth, words slipping out between his lips in a hiss meant only for himself. "I'm sorry, Miller. If I let you live, we all die." He sucked the chill down to his fist, bracing for a clean kill. Textbook soldier work. Quick blood, no scream. But before he could wrench his wrist, a distant bark cut through the motel fence line. Claws scratched on concrete, paired with a low motorcycle hum that choked off abruptly. He froze mid-strike. The corner of his eye flicked to the cracked window. 2 hooded figures slipped past, shoulders brushing like coiled serpents. One wore headphones, gripping a recording device. A tiny red light blinked once, then vanished. A signal for the veteran pack lying in wait around the room. 3 blocks away, hunched in a corner of his old wooden house, Jerome sat over a worn desk, one ear plugged with a black rubber earpiece. A report hissed through static and night wind. "Grady double trap. He's about to kill Miller. Stage it as you're doing. Advise you keep position hidden." Jerome chuckled, a rasp blending with the dense dark. "You want a double trap? I'll gut you from the inside." He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, biting back the growl that begged to shred the night open. Outside the motel, the veteran squad cinched their perimeter tight. One fixed an infrared camera along the wall, another slithered to the side window, a combat knife strapped at the hip. No orders barked through comms. They passed commands by glances and finger signs. Keep Miller alive, take Grady alive. If blood spills, record every drop. Inside, Grady adjusted his breathing, chin tucked, dagger grazing Miller's nape like a final caress. But just as he shifted his shoulder for the kill, a sharp snap cracked by his ear. A calloused hand clamped his knife wrist, squeezing till bone ground under skin. Miller exhaled a wet gasp, eyes snapping open, still lost in the tail end of one nightmare while a fresh one bloomed. Grady spun his head straight into the glare of a grinning veteran, voice rasping close. "So who were you burying tonight, Snake?" The motel room's darkness shattered at the foot of the bed. The knife never kissed skin, but the scent of blood hovered ready. Only this time, the hand gripping the hilt was the trapped prey, flailing inside his own sprung snare. The old, run-down room inside the suburban warehouse, borrowed by the veteran crew as a staging den, now glowed with a sickly yellow light like the gut of a beast clinging to its last breath. On the cracked concrete floor, Grady knelt low, hands bound tight behind his back, face pressed inches from the cold ground. A combat knife hovered at his nape, its snake skin peeled without a sound. He forced himself to breathe, his mouth twisted sideways, barking out a threat that broke mid-growl. "You bastards, think choking me ends it? Someone's gonna clean all you filth up." He didn't finish. The knife handle pressed deeper, the blade teasing a thin cut along his neck, fresh blood scenting the air like newly wetted metal. A shadow stepped from the far corner. The light followed, spilling over Jerome's face, sunken cheekbones, old, scarred eyes, a breath that smoked from fatigue yet never quivered. He didn't shout, he didn't brandish the blade, he only looked, and that stare alone could snap Grady's spine in two. Jerome leaned close, breath rasping, straight in Grady's ear, voice grinding out without wasting a syllable. "You bark well, Grady. The question is how long I'll let you keep barking." Grady swallowed hard, chin trembling with that old nervous tick, then, for the first time, cracked open a confession like a rat squealing. I'm just a pawn. I never wanted to kill Shadow. I didn't want Miller dead. I only followed orders, the boss's orders. I'm just the guard dog for their house." Jerome pressed his forehead almost to Grady's, eyes dull and cutting like cold wind licking an unhealed wound. "Then bite back. Live or die. That's your choice." Grady's shoulders slumped lower, eyes darting around like a cornered feral mutt gasping its final, rattling breath. He nodded, breathing reeking of defeat and scalp sweat. "Fine, I'll spill it all. I'll bite. Just get me out of here. I don't want to die." The veteran leaned into Jerome, voice low. "He wants an escape pass overseas once he's done. What's your call?" Jerome didn't glance, didn't reply. He pulled the knife from Grady's neck, flexed the hilt until it cracked a joint, then flung it to the floor with a hard clack. His voice was a hammer driving nails. "I decide if you live after I get what I want. You're worth nothing yet." Grady panted like a half-strangled dog, eyes bulging, throat veins pumping fresh blood, for the first time realizing that the same knife he had pressed to Miller's throat last night was now waiting to slit his own at the slightest twitch. The warehouse air vibrated with ragged breathing, but held as still as a graveyard before a gutting. Grady now sat cross-legged on the damp concrete, wrists unbound but red-ringed where the wire bit deep. In front of him, an old battered laptop hooked to a backup battery hummed like its guts would pop. The pale screen reflected his washed-out face, hair plastered with sweat, cracked lips twisting tighter, the look of a hunting hound whimpering before being shoved in its own grave. One veteran stood off his shoulder, camera tight on Grady's neck, tendons twitching, sweat beads bursting on his forehead as he began to speak. His voice rattled out like a snake forced to spit poison it could never swallow again. "I, Grady M. Collins, officer of the Internal Security Unit, hereby confess to all involvement in the killing of the dog Shadow. The order to kill Miller is a cover-up. The plot to frame former Delta Force Commander Jerome Tate. An Excel sheet flicked up. The cursor swept line by line. Expenses for scene cleanup, transfers to offshore accounts, black money routed from a front company to internal security. Another clip queued up next, covert footage showing the boss himself, eyes half shut in a sly smile, pen scratching a signature. The scratch echoed through the tinny laptop speaker like a cat's claws scraping a coffin lid. Grady swallowed, eyes wide dry, voice suddenly smooth, the rhythm of a disciplinary hearing. I acted under direct orders from my superior. Every threat, bribe, and smear campaign against Jerome Tate was by his command. I did it to buy my family's safety. He paused, shoulders shivering, one hand crushing the other so hard the knuckles blanched. As if he let go, he'd convulse like a fish on a hook. The veteran panned the camera wide, catching Jerome in profile, his eyes bottomless, shoulders rigid like a gravestone pinning the living underneath. Jerome bent low, breath gusting over Grady's ear, making the sweat break again. His words came out like a blade, already pressing the soft spot under a jaw. Spill every last secret of this nest. Lie to me once, I'll cut out your tongue. You'll never hiss another word. Grady bobbed his head, eyes locked on the screen, voice rattling fast as he read the final lines of his confession. Another veteran hooked up a backup laptop, slotted in a USB, and cloned the confession files like sowing seeds in a swamp, craving blood. The copy progress chime ticked, tick, ticked, each ping cracking another vertebra in the boss's hidden spine. The data bar crawled across the taskbar, its ghostly blue flickering in Jerome's eye, the silent blaze of an old wolf's fangs, ready to howl one last time as the nest of snakes cracked open under daylight. By an hour no one expected, the sun just peeking over rusted warehouse roofs, Grady's confession was a wildfire scorching every platform. Headlines detonated like artillery. Delta Force betrayed by its own dog. Bold font, blood-red millions of shares ripping through closed groups, burner accounts, black market gossip rings. Inside a cramped coffee shop, office workers hunched over screens, earbuds echoing Grady's rasp. I, Grady M. Collins, confess it all. The shadow kill order, the Miller hit order. His trembling hand clawed the table, eyes drained, the look of a mutt gutting itself before its master could slit its throat. Back at the power circle, the boss and his henchmen vanished from their luxury haunt. Holed up in a gated mansion on the outskirts, in a locked boardroom, the police commissioner dragged deep puffs off his cigarette, phones shrieking faster than he could answer, black funds frozen by the hour, subpoenas dropping like hail in dry season. Miller, thought buried long ago, now staggered into an armored van, double bulletproof vests wrapped around him, head bowed behind ballistic glass. Alive, the garbage, now a secondary witness, his testimony the nail driven into the heart of the squirming nest. Inside the old wooden shack with peeling walls, sticky notes, and red string webbed over pins on a war map, Jerome stood like an aging surgeon over an open chest, hands barely shaking but eyes steady as a bone saw. He nodded once, voice pitched just enough for his veteran pack to hear. Peel back the last layer. I won't let this snake keep a single bone. On the TV jammed against the wall, Grady's bowed face flickered in a red border. Breaking news crawling in endless loops, replaying every shred of proof, every signed kill order from the boss. Each word bled raw, but scrubbed clean as the public tore at the filth to the marrow. The shack's front door cracked open, morning wind slipping past Jerome's frayed shoulder. He braced a hand on the wood frame, turned his scarred face into the chill. A blade homed of rust, scraped clean. For the first time since Shadow's final howl, he shut his eyes and exhaled. Long and even, no more growl coiled in his ribs. Behind him, the nest devoured itself, writhing under the feet of a justice he'd trained, reluctantly, to howl in broad daylight open. And the long night, at last, lay shredded by the storm, its guts steaming clean under the raw, honest sun. Miller pulled his cap low over his eyes, slipping through a garbage-reeking alley behind the outskirts bus depot, one hand hidden under his jacket, clutching a grimy pocket notebook scrawled with old henchman's numbers. He stumbled forward, mumbling a useless incantation through gritted teeth. I can't die yet. His breath dragged across his tongue, bitter as the stray bullet that nearly blew out his empty skull years ago. He drifted into a rundown motel near a gas station, paid with crumpled bills, muttered at the clerk, "No one knows I'm here, got it?" Then slammed the door shut, like nailing himself inside a coffin. The old phone screen lit up. Miller dialed familiar numbers. The last scraps of the boss's crew, the ones he thought would hide him like a nicked cleaver hidden under the sink. The line cut out 3 times. The 4th try finally picked up. A dry, hollow voice said, "Stay put, someone's coming. Don't show your face." Miller collapsed onto the moldy mattress, throat sandpaper dry, one hand gripping the bathroom window ledge, as if it were his final escape route. Grady's snarled threats from nights ago still buzzed in his skull, along with Jerome's shadowed whisper through a swirl of cigarette smoke. "Live or die, you choose." Just as Miller shifted, peeking through the foggy toilet glass, he had no clue that every motel roof corner bristled with thermal scanners. 3 tactical operatives crept out from an armored van, infrared beams slicing clean lines along the back wall of room 12. Radio crackled in their earpieces. Rats in the cage, door sealed, no escape through the window. Miller stepped on the sink, wriggling halfway through the bathroom window latch left unfastened. Just as his foot scraped the rain-slick roof ledge, 2 rough hands clamped his shoulders. Zip ties hissed tight around his wrists. His breath burst out in a hoarse whimper. "I was just following orders. Just following orders. Don't shoot." One operator shoved his head to the wet concrete, voice flat as spitting out tobacco. "Shut it. The laws had enough of your mouth." Miller writhed, wrists twisting under the ties, eyes bulging in one last plea for a scrap of mercy. "I know more. Let me go. I'll spill everything. The veteran stood off to the side by the armored van, one hand deep in his coat pocket, the other rubbing a temple with a dry chuckle. "Doesn't matter what it squeals now. Confession tape's out. He's just a rotten claw, forcing the head snake to crawl out." Miller got dragged into the van, neck bent, scalp scraping the armored doorframe. The door slammed with a bang, drowned out by a patrol siren wailing down the road, slicing through the Motel 24/7 neon glare. Mainstream news spat out a headline just in time. "Miller captured alive. Final link about to break open. The rat was caged. Now all that mattered was gutting him so the remaining snakes would strangle each other on their own coil." Veterans spread out across bus terminals, old train depots, and domestic airport gates. License plates trailing Grady's car got pinged and re-pinged on the electronic boards. Red lights flickered, died, flickered back, vanished again. Every makeshift camera sparked static the moment his figure slid past a turnstile or ducked a side alley, as if his hide was sheep's wool but the gut inside still a gray old wolf's jaw, ready to bite its owner. One bald veteran sat crouched by a massive wall map, papering an old container's plywood. Red threads crisscrossed Grady's name, the boss's face, and a tangle of black fund accounts. Cigarette smoke whirled like ghost fog. His other hand stroked a stripped pistol barrel, steel butt warm under his palm to ward off rust. He jabbed a knuckle at Grady's freshly snapped photo, those dead marble eyes still gleaming with the last twist. A stray hunting hound is still a stray bullet. If he's breathing, who's he gonna bite next? The naked barrel pointed at the map, but no clue which forehead it would punch through next. A radio hissed in the earpiece. Scout's voice, urgent. "Commander, lost him at bus terminal 7. Camera down, signal jammed. Taxi picked him up, driver says he can't remember the face." Out in his dusty old wood house, Jerome listened through the comms, eyes stuck on the fogged window glass. He didn't light another smoke, just shook his head slowly, voice grinding into the line. "Dead or alive, don't matter. Bring me the snake's head first. Let the mutt run. I'll cut its tail later." On the corner CCTV feed, a grainy shot flickered up. Border checkpoint cam, Grady, hooded up, slipping past an empty gate, shoulders hunched like a feral civet slinking through border scrub. A second later, static bloomed. Feed blinked, dead. The night swallowed that bony back hole. Wind rattled the tin roof. The veterans huddled around the map. The cold-barreled pistol lay belly up on the steel table, its throat empty, yet the gunpowder stink from Hellman's old trenches hadn't faded, just biting for the last pull to split a snake's throat wide open. By Monday morning, the confession clip had formed every news feed. Jerome Tate's face got plastered across banners and posts tagged Delta Force Hero next to the slogan, "Shadow never bites. His master does." Law schools, cybersecurity classes, even TikTok pundits spliced Grady's and Miller's teary tapes as live case studies, teaching kids what an inside trader behind a shiny badge looks like. By late afternoon, reporters clogged the patch of dry dirt out front of the creaky wooden shack. Booms and mics poked like cannon barrels. Cameras whirred in the hands of interns whose suit hems were splashed with mud. One nasal reporter craned over the guard line, firing off a question like a hammer. "Mr. Tate, will you run for mayor? You're the unbroken symbol of justice this nation needs." On the porch, Jerome leaned on a peeling post. Between his fingers, an unlit cigarette trembled faintly in the wind that teased his gray hair. He stared at the swarm of faces, each blinking red cam light reflected in his pupils like flecks of backward bled blood. He breathed out words so low it was more a spit at the mirror painting him hero. "Hero my ass. Badges shine brightest when they're soaked in your own blood." No one quite heard him, or if they did, they didn't understand. Reporters pressed more questions. Camera lights stuttered, but he just dropped his eyes to the patch of charred ash on the porch, the very step where Shadow once lay, muzzle resting on the wood, waiting for him to come home from Helmand. That night, the crowd drifted when the porch lamp flicked out. Jerome stepped inside, and the old yellow bulb lit up a wall webbed with red string and sun-bleached sticky notes. Every thread tying Grady, Miller, the boss, now just tangled strands of nothing. He tugged the last note down, paper rustling in his calloused grip like brittle bones snap. The cracked hearth coughed up a lazy flame. Jerome tossed the paper in. The ash curled, licking at his nose, with a heat too weak to thaw the war chill lodged deep at his spine. He struck a match, finally lighting the cigarette he'd clutched all evening. Silver smoke parted the gray dusk, slithering through the cracked window. His eyes lifted, no longer bitter, just heavy with an ache pooled deep in sunken lids. Justice, sometimes, is simply an old wolf knowing how to howl just enough for the nest of snakes to throttle each other breathless. Night settled into the old wooden house, heavy with damp left over from the passing storm. Jerome sat sunken in a frayed armchair. The fireplace crackled, throwing an orange flicker across the wall, still clinging to a few loose threads of red string. He didn't look at the map, nor at the bloodstains sunk into the floorboards. His eyes fixed on a small photo frame leaning on the shelf beside the hearth. The old photo, edges blurred, its wooden frame chipped, showed baby Shadow resting its muzzle on a dented Delta Force cap, eyes round, fur still patchy like fresh mist. That photo had traveled with Jerome through Helmand, scratched and soaked with sweat and mud, yet it had never fallen from his armored chest. He hunched forward, calloused fingers trembling as they lifted the frame off the shelf. A thin coat of dust clouded it, smearing even the red thread spidered in his eyes. The rough sleeve brushed the glass, each swipe erasing, then revealing Shadow's eyes again. Eyes that had long returned to the dirt, yet met his gaze tonight like a young private refusing to abandon post. Jerome sniffed once, voice cracking out, dry as the ashes settled deep in the fireplace. "You ripped my back open to the light, soldier, but you paid with your life." No vow followed, no howl left in him, like the day he tore out of Helmand, covering an entire forest in gunfire to drag Shadow back from a nest of bullets. The fire snapped and ate at the rotting logs, its warmth too thin to soothe the scar running beneath the collar of his worn shirt. Jerome's shadow stretched long, hunched over the small frame, like an old beast bowing before a hill of memories still veiled in stubborn fog. When his hardened fingertip touched the corner of the frame, forced his wrist to set it back on the shelf exactly where it belonged. His finger lingered another beat, pressing lightly against Shadow's glass-pressed eyes, choking down the tremor in his throat before it cracked out as a sob. Outside, night wind scraped the eaves and threaded through the walls. Inside, the last ember in the hearth glowed red behind his silent back. No tear fell onto the floorboards stained with Shadow's blood. Only steady breaths rumbled like an old guard dog lying over the last trench. The hush of justice exposed at last. Morning flared bone-white against the old city hall. Press fences bristled with shoulder-to-shoulder reporters, microphones thrust high like a spiked crown, encircling the entrance. On a rolling digital billboard, words scrolled, "Jerome Tate, exposer of the Black Fund, Delta Force honor restored." Beneath it, a little girl hugged a poster of Shadow, the rush job slogan stamped in bold, "Shadow never bite." Inside the assembly hall, a podium stamped with the police department and Justice Committee seals stood dead center. A few high-ranking officers bowed their heads when the cameras panned past, none daring to meet the starched shirt-backed of Jerome standing behind the curtain, waiting for the cue. Flash bulbs popped as the inspector read each word slowly. The city police department and the Justice Authority formally apologized to Mr. Jerome Tate, former Delta Force commander, for the damage to his reputation, the baseless slander, and for the loss of a loyal canine named Shadow. A silver-haired veteran smoked a dead cigarette in the crowd behind the press row, drew on the filter with a dry hiss, then sneered through his teeth. "They cleaned this system's face with Shadow's blood and half the old man's life. Only difference is the mask shines brighter now." A polite smatter of applause rippled aside when Jerome stepped to the mic. He walked slowly, shoulders bearing the old scar, buried beneath a crisp shirt. Sweat seeped through the fabric so plainly even the studio lights caught every soaked crease. His knuckles tapped the mic edge, thick fingers drumming as if searching for an old gun buried under dust. His lips parted, voice raspy from a long night by the hearth. "I don't need to be your hero. I need no one to die wrong like Shadow did." No more questions. Flash bulbs burst again. Lenses zoomed close on every shirt wrinkle, every drop of sweat rolling down the bent spine of an old warrior standing under Justice's spotlight. A light too late to save a small dog's final breath. Jerome turned on his heel. No bow, no wave to the cheers. He stepped off the press stage steps, and the crowd parted like dry grass before an old wolf's last growl. His figure slipped beyond the glare, swallowed by the gray shadow beneath City Hall's overhang. No flash strong enough to catch the fold at his nape. News tickers looped on every local channel like a new gospel the city was forced to memorize. Jerome Tate, Delta Force's last soldier, expose of the Black Fund, the Force's honor scrubbed clean. Shadow, the immortal dog, now a civic lesson for the next generation. In classrooms, kids sat up straight, lips sounding out Shadow's name while the teacher intoned, "A dog killed for nothing made a whole system bow its head. Remember him, so when you grow up, you all know when to bark back." Back in the old wooden house, a tiny TV leaned crooked on a low tea table, replaying Jerome's slow turn away from this morning's ceremony. Footage looped of him stepping off the stage, sweat blotching his back under studio lights. Replayed like a saint's portrait that people arranged to mask the garbage they once buried. Jerome hunched over the table edge, gnarled hands cupping a cold teacup long gone stale. No steam rose, only a bitter taste stuck to his lips. He set it down, pulled out a battered black notebook. The old pen clipped to its spine cracked audibly as he clenched it too tightly. The pen scratched the page in slow strokes, ink bleeding with the tremor he couldn't hide. He didn't preach, didn't spill more blood on paper, just muttered soft enough for no ears but his. "Shadow, you're why I'm still breathing. My part's done. The rest, the kids will teach each other when to bark." Evening wind slipped through the window crack, making Shadow's photo beside the old Delta Force flag tremble faintly. The last sunbeam of the day slid across the glass edge, marking a pale gold line over the paper and the scar running deep beneath Jerome's collar. That line glowed like a silent oath, unwritten but promising a fair price if anyone dared twist it again. He closed the notebook, leaned back in the chair. Eyes drifted shut, breath mingled with the wind, nudging the old photo by the window. Outside, dusk drained dry. His shadow stretched across the moldy floorboards like the trace of an old wolf, last of his pack, sleeping at last. Justice had flayed the nest of snakes wide open, link by link, but beneath Jerome's skin the battlefield blood still seeped, quiet, unseen, and forever unpatched. Early morning. The brickyard in front of the wooden porch still glittered with frost that hadn't yet melted. The soft scrape of a bamboo broom rasped under Jerome's hands, brushing away the last yellow leaves left behind by the windy night. He stood slightly hunched, old shoulders rising beneath a frayed gray flannel, sweeping in slow, steady strokes like breaths that kept his heart familiar with survival. A curt knock echoed from the porch. 3 figures, familiar old veterans, stood at the edge of the yard, boots still caked with mud from the narrow trail they'd crossed to get here. In the arms of the man in the middle, an old blanket wrapped around a small shepherd pup, fur gray with speckles of black, eyes barely half open, a pale bluish ring wet with milky breath. They didn't speak right away. They simply set the pup down on the step, every gaze locked on Jerome, waiting to see if his reaction would shatter the silence that had cloaked this yard for days on end. Jerome didn't drop the broom, didn't ask a word. He stepped forward, each step soft, yet his boot soles still knocked a hollow thunk on the old bricks. He squatted down, knees cracking, and offered a weathered hand, palm turned up just beneath the puppy's nose. The tiny shepherd flinched back, its damp snout pressed against his calloused fingers. It sniffed a few short breaths, its stubby tail wagged slowly like grass trembling in a passing breeze. That fresh young breath warmed the old scar slicing across Jerome's palm, sending a shiver through him like a man feeling his own heartbeat again, after burying fire beneath ashes all night. One grizzled veteran rasped out, voice like a knife being unsheathed. "This dog doesn't replace Shadow, but it'll guard your sleep now." Jerome didn't look at any of the men standing there in faded jackets, blocking the slant of morning sun. He only lowered his head, a long breath rolling through his shoulders, mouth tightening, then opening. "His name is Shadow. No number, just Shadow." No one cheered. No one rushed to clap him on the back. Only the smell of dew, wet grass, and the tiny pup's soft breathing leaking from its muzzle, echoing into Jerome's hand stroking slowly from the pup's little crown down its fuzzy spine. Once again, the wooden porch bore witness to breathing, not a blood-choked howl, not a low growl at the dirty muzzle of a gun, just breath, a quiet vow that, so long as an old wolf bows his back, a shadow will guard the gate at night, bark in his stead, howl in his place, and keep watch over a justice that needs no badge. In mornings that followed, the old iron gate, once silent for years, found new footprints of neighbors stepping across the old bricks. Elderly hands brought paper-wrapped biscuit crumbs. Children pressed up to the wooden fence, squealing over each other. Shadow 2, come here." The young gray shepherd, belly fur only just fluffing up, legs still clumsy, would whirl around at Shadow 2 with a puzzled turn of its head. It would loop circles around the hibiscus bushes, chew dry leaves to pulp, then dash back to flop down across Jerome's brown shoes left on the step. Jerome simply squatted by the old wash basin, chicken feather broom brushing away fallen leaves, eyes flicking sideways at the kids mangling the name. He growled, just loud enough for their little ears, not enough to scare them. "No number. Call him Shadow. 1 is Shadow, 2 is still Shadow. No number." He never chained the new dog's neck. The old chain that once belonged to the first Shadow still hung silently on a wooden peg, half the lock rusted through, yet Jerome never took it down, nor replaced it. The young Shadow just roamed free across the yard, ducked under the steps, barked at lizards skittering across the wall, then sprawled back on the porch, head resting exactly where Jerome's shoes always were. One noon, the sun stretched across the walls, and a young reporter crept close, tape recorder primed in the pocket of a threadbare vest. He bent low, smacking his lips with a coaxing tone. "Mr. Tate, have you forgiven the system that once slandered you, tried to bury you alive?" Jerome didn't lift his head. He just jabbed a finger behind the ear of Shadow, dozing, curled back by his hip. His rough fingernails scratched the new downy fur, voice gravelly but clear enough for the young man's notebook. "I don't keep the system, I keep the dog. Justice has no badge number. Remember that when you write your article." The question the reporter meant to follow died in his throat, swallowed with the sweat pooling at his hairline. The recorder kept ticking, spools turning, but nobody cared to listen. At midday, the young Shadow suddenly jerked awake, lifted its head, growled a low, shaky growl, then let out a single howl, thin, high-pitched, but certain. The sound sliced the stillness of the brickyard, slipped through the doorway, scattering the sparrows hiding under the eaves into a flurry of wings. Jerome braced against his cane, watching the pup howl, lips pressing tight before spreading into a rare crooked grin, his chin dipping once slow. "Knowing how to bark is enough, Shadow." A line cracked open like an old bullet, reminding him the old chain, though silent, still guards justice with fangs, never needing to lock around any throat. Dusk draped long shadows over the wooden eaves, late sunlight pooling like thin honey at the bottom of a cup. Jerome perched on the familiar porch step, back resting against the flaking column, knee bent to give the young Shadow a pillow. Warmth from the pup's belly seeped through his old pants, soaking into knees that creaked every time he shifted. Beside his foot, a brand-new chain, silver lock spotless, lay coiled across the planks. His fingers drifted to it now and then, tapping the lock as if testing a round waiting in the chamber. But each touch ended with him letting go. He bought that chain, not to leash Shadow, but to remind himself that claws do need tethers. Yet the firmest leash sits in the breath exchanged between man and dog. Dusk wind flicked across the old tin roof, flicked Shadow's tail side to side, chasing a dry leaf across the yard before dropping it back at Jerome's foot. Shadow's eyes fluttered shut, ears twitching at broken snatches of old war stories. Jerome murmured, "Helmand, the first Shadow crouching beside a mortar crater, Justice wearing a mask and the teeth that tore that mask off." Jerome bent low, lips close enough to the pup's milk-scented ear. His breath ruffled the baby fur, voice hoarse enough the wind leaned in to hear. "You can't replace him, but you remind me, justice still breathes when a muzzle barks at the night." Outside the rotting gate, an old CCTV, rigged by veteran hands, quietly captured it all. The aging lens framed it perfectly. An old man's curved shoulders, a young dog draped across his pants, the flicker of the hearth flicking behind his back, like a memory sneaking around the last embers. No medals pinned to his chest, no certificates taped to the wall, only a man, a dog, and a howl for inheritance. Jerome's hand lifted from the new chain, settling on Shadow's back, patting gently in a rhythm like drumming for the moon. His eyes lifted past the dusk, pooling like spilled ink. His voice unrolled in stone-hard syllables, just enough to reach the shepherd drifting into sleep. "When I go down, you bark for me. Remember that, Shadow." He closed his eyes, old breath merging with the soft puppy howl rattling up from under his knee. The old yard's shadows swallowed the last hint of day, leaving only the silhouette of an old wolf resting on his porch, with a faint rumble embedded in a young howl, rumazing that this line of justice will keep growling, leash or no leash, badge or none. Perhaps no one could have guessed that on a cold night in the suburbs of Helena, Montana, the bark of a loyal dog would be enough to pierce through the rotting shell of a system once thought untouchable. Shadow, that stubborn shepherd, fell to a stupid bullet, But he did not die alone. He dragged down with him the fake, righteous mask of those who wore police badges, yet bowed to money and lie. And standing behind him was his master, Jerome Tate, a former Delta Force commander thought to have buried his past for good, who roared like the last wolf of his pack to reclaim justice, not just for himself, but for all who'd ever had their voices silenced, their honor buried under rumor and social prejudice. The story of Jerome and Shadow is not simply a battle between one old soldier and a few power-hungry abusers. It reignites a question we've all flinched from at least once. How many times have we judged someone just by their face, their skin, or a past whispered by others? How often have we trusted authority, trusted stamps and badges, forgetting that true justice lives in the heart of those willing to stand when everyone else bows? Jerome, now gray-haired and stripped of his Delta Force medals, no longer standing amid Hellman's firestorms, still carries in his chest something those young cops and black budge puppeteers could never buy: unshakable resolve and loyalty that no price can touch. A wrongly killed dog, a slandered veteran, and then an entire corrupt system forced to bow and apologize on national television. This is no fairy tale. It's a reality check that reminds us, never rush to judge someone through the lens of prejudice. The worth and strength of a human being, or of a loyal dog, can never be dismissed just because dirty power says so.